Welcome to episode 34 of The Expert and the Idiot. Today I am talking to Thomas Griffiths of Tomaskas Ltd. And I'm pretty excited. We've had this booked out for quite a while. And
yes, we have.
Yeah, I'm excited because we're going to be talking about something that I want to learn more about. I want to do right by my animals, and kind of the way I've been looking at it is, you know, like if you want to get in shape, right, you get in the gym and you just, you know, you start doing what's fun, you know, maybe, you know, people will get in there and they'll do a little walking on the treadmill and some bicep curls and bench press, and then they're done. And then as time goes on, they're like, you know what, maybe I should refine this and start optimizing it and getting more benefit and, you know, zero in on my diet and focus on squatting more and, you know, my form and not worry about how much weight I'm moving. You know, it's more about the technique and all that. And that's kind of how I'm looking at lighting and heating now, is that I've got cages set up that I'm very happy with, and I'm happy with the aesthetics and everything. And I think I did the best I could with what information I was exposed to when I set up, you know. So with all that being said, we'll get into everything. But what can you tell me about yourself, Thomas? Your background, what you do, when you got into keeping, where are you located?
Cool. Yeah. So a brief biography, if you like. So my name's Tom. Some people call me Thomas, some people call me Tom. My close friends call me Tommy, which is quite funny. So I am a UK based in Manchester in the UK, animal husbandry, welfare and lighting consultant. Through my company called Tomaskas Ltd. And I work with a lot of zoos and a lot of private collections in the UK, in Europe, and in the US. There's a few in Australia as well. But the other side of my job is acting as a research and development consultant for the development of lighting products. So I use my lighting focus, because that's kind of my specific focus, to act as a consultant on the development of products. So generally lighting products. So a lot of LEDs, a lot of, more recently, especially in the US, a few incandescent things like heat lamps, and T5 lamps as well. And that is kind of what I generally do in terms of keeping animals. Well, in terms of the zoo work I do, a lot of the zoo work I do is mammal and bird based and not actually reptile based. So we do a lot of in the zoo world. There's a lot of talk at the moment about lighting mammals, and even from being a young child, when you first get your first hamster or a set of guinea pigs or anything like that, you never buy lights for those things. That's just never even a question, right? They don't need lights. And hilariously, they benefit the same from full spectrum lighting as much as reptiles do. There's no reason not to provide these things, and there is every reason to provide these things. And what we see a lot in the mammal and the bird world is a step towards, or in the zoo world specifically rather, a step towards not thinking about whether an animal needs something, and more thinking about whether it improves or increases welfare states. And that is a big shift in perspective, or a shift in position from dealing with private collections and quote unquote hobbyists, because the general consensus from the hobby world seems to be, does my animal need it? That's the number one question people give, right? Does my animal need this? Mm-hmm. And the zoo world tends to ask more of a question of, will this benefit or improve or increase the welfare state of the animal? And that is the question that is asked instead. And it's a slight difference, and we can talk about the nuance of that. But there's lots of talk on reptiles, but mammals and birds, they're really interested in this, especially at the moment. There's new rules with the World Association of Zoo and Aquaria, WASA, and it's to do with assessing your welfare and doing welfare audits and welfare assessments. And we have essentially legislation now to light certain mammals. So primates are a prime example of that. So pretty much every primate should be provided with lighting, even if they're given access to outdoors. And that is specific full spectrum lighting. Now I use my own definition of full spectrum for that, which we can talk about shortly. But the legislation refers to UVB, and we know for a fact this thing benefits the animals and improves welfare and increases welfare state. So it's not unheard of to light mammals in the zoo world, which if you talk to reptile keepers or hobbyists, that is not a thing. People don't do that at all. In terms of what I keep myself, I have normal pets, if you like. I have some cats, but I have what many in the normal world would consider strange, so your reptiles. I have a little boa constrictor. I have a rescue royal python, or ball python as you call them in the States. I have some emerald tree skinks. I have a tegu. I have some white tree frogs. I have quite a few little things that I keep myself as well.
How do you keep your tegu?
He is upstairs in a room. Essentially, he is upstairs in a room right now. He's dwindling down for brumation. But yeah, he's pretty damn well lit. I can tell you that much. It costs me a lot to run my house.
I bet.
Power. But yeah, he's kept in a big, essentially half a room, with different stuff, and I change around his enclosure a little bit every now and then to try and keep him entertained. But he comes out a lot, to be honest. In the summer, especially, he comes out all the time, and he follows me around the house.
Oh yeah.
There's this sort of, people will always say, "Oh, he's following you because it's warm," and it's no, he genuinely, and he's station trained, so he can sit on his station. So yeah, he's a good boy. His name's Tofu. He's a really good boy.
That's awesome. We had an Argentine black and white tegu.
Yeah.
Quite a while ago, maybe 15 years ago, and I remember just being totally blown away by the speed at which she grew. She grew so quick.
Yeah, in the first year they rocket.
Oh my gosh!
I had Tofu when he was, a hatchling essentially.
Yeah.
And within a year he was nearly fully grown. They grow real quick in the first year, and we think that's to do with when they're small they're prey, and when they're big things tend not to eat them as much, and they've got a little bit more of a fight back. It's quite a common thing in animals is fast growth in the younger years, unless they are a family-oriented animal. So we tend to see that animals that stay within a group tend to stay smaller for longer. Elephants are a classic example of that. They'll stay with the family for a long time, and the young will stay young for many years.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all very cool stuff. And so let's kind of jump right into it. So with the way I'm set up right now, I've got an Arcadia T5 HO, one of the high output UVB bulbs. I think I did the Shade Dweller, the 6 or 7%, whatever it is, something like that. I think it's 6%. And so that's what I have in all my 24-inch tall enclosures.
Okay, 2 foot tall. Okay.
And yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm speaking out loud.
It's 2/3 of a meter.
Yeah.
And I've got, then I use a deep heat projector.
Okay.
For heat. So that's how I supply my heat. Now, when I was researching in the beginning, I thought, well, I want something that's going to provide heat throughout the night, something that I can kind of set and forget. and I have them set up where they are on all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and they're dialed into where, I'm in Florida, so I'm in, the southern part of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And so my ambient temperature goes up to about 78, 80 degrees in the
Yep.
afternoon. And then we have it drop down when we sleep. So to about
Yep.
70. And so that's just dialed in without a thermostat or anything, that hot spot peaks at 88, 90
Mm-hmm.
in the afternoon. And then it kind of drops down. And I figured that would sort of simulate nature. Now, on all the packaging, it really sold me, and in all the literature on the websites and everything, and photographs on the boxes, they really sold me on the deep heat projector, or emitter, whatever you want to call it,
Yep.
is going to penetrate the muscles of the animal. It's not going to just heat the surface like a ceramic heat emitter. It's going to penetrate. It's going to be more therapeutic. It's going to be better. They're going to love it. Uh, I spent a fortune on these things.
Mm-hmm.
Probably close to $300
Mm-hmm.
USD, across all of them. They're not cheap, right?
No, they're not.
And as I'm talking to more and more people that are more aware of lighting and everything, they're saying, look, that information that's on the box is kind of misleading. It's not accurate. You want to get an actual light. And I've started experimenting. This enclosure here has a 25 watt basking lamp
Yeah.
from Exoterra.
Yeah.
And so I have that on the timer with the UVB. So it just comes on at night. The temperature drops a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
The temperature in this room here gets down to about 70, 72. And so now what I've noticed with doing that is my boa constrictor, she's like on that basking platform waiting for that light to come on, and she's spending a lot more time there. She seems
Cool.
to, when I first put her in there, and she was going from the deep heat to the basking bulb, I've noticed that she kind of sprawls out more. I have a slate placemat, so that sort of absorbs the heat.
Yeah.
And so I've temp gunned that, and that gets to about 88, 90, and that's at full blast. So with all that being said, let's talk about the heat projectors. Should I be getting away from these? What's ideal? What's the difference? And I've got a whole list of questions here that we can
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely. Yeah.
tackle as we go along.
So this kind of stems back to a term called incandescence.
Hmm.
And incandescence is essentially when something starts to glow because it's hot. And you know that something is hot because it's glowing, right? And I'm probably teaching grandma to suck eggs here, right? You know that if you heat something up more, it starts to glow. It starts to get hot and glow. And that is what we refer to as black body radiation. Now, this is physics, and I'm going to try and make this as simple as possible for you. But when we say black body radiation, what we are referring to is a theoretical object called a black body. Now, it's completely theoretical. And a black body is a thing, if you like. It can be a ball, it can be a bar, whatever you want. And when you apply energy to a black body, it gets hot. And the more energy you apply, the hotter it gets. And when it gets to a certain temperature, it starts to re-emit. In fact, it's all the time, really. It re-emits that energy as photons, as light. And the more energy you give it, the more photons it emits as light, and there's different wavelengths of what we call wavelengths of light. And you can calculate, or you can tell just by looking at it, you can tell what temperature it is by the light that it is giving off. So you know that if you look at your 25 watt heat lamp, it is glowing white hot, inverted commas. versus you look at a heat projector and it glows a very, very dim red, barely any light.
Mm-hmm.
And thus the filament inside, the piece of metal that is glowing, that is acting like a black body, is hotter in the 25 watt heat lamp than it is in the heat projector. Even though the heat projector might be 80 watts versus 25 watts, the actual filament itself is hotter in the heat lamp. And you can tell that by looking at it because it glows hotter. And you know that if you turn it up, if you could, it would glow whiter and whiter and whiter and whiter and whiter. Equally, if you turned it down, it would go dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. And eventually what it would essentially do is turn into a heat projector because you turn it so far down.
Mm.
And what a heat projector essentially is a very, very dimmed heat lamp. Highly dimmed. Essentially, that's what it's essentially replicating. And what it does when you dim a heat lamp is it shifts the spectrum. Now, these are all words, and I'm well aware that this is quite technical, but it shifts the spectrum basically. And what that means is that it changes the output of the lamp because the temperature of the filament has changed. And we know that it's like a black body, and I said the black bodies, you can tell the filament, the temperature of the black body, you can tell by the color of it. And that's the case with the heat projectors and the heat lamps. And coincidentally, the sun is also like a black body. So the sun works the same way. And we know the temperature of the surface of the sun. The temperature of the surface of the sun is about 5,600 Kelvin. In Celsius, that's around 5,400 Celsius. Couldn't tell you what it is in Fahrenheit, but I'm sure somebody can go on Google and find that out. So if we say around 5,500 Celsius, 5,500 Kelvin, around there, that's what we're aiming for in terms of the perfect light source, is a black body, approximate, that is approximately 5,500 Celsius. That would be the perfect light source. If you could get that and put it in a bulb and stick it in your enclosure, that would be the sun. It doesn't quite work like that, unfortunately, because the tungsten filament that's in your heat lamp is about 3,000 Kelvin. It's actually less. It's about 2,500 Kelvin.
Mm.
So it's about half as hot. And when it's half as hot, the spectrum shifts away from sunlight towards unnatural wavelengths. The heat projector is even further away. It's around 800 Kelvin or 500 Celsius, around 500 Celsius. So we've gone from 5,500 Celsius to 2,300 Celsius on your heat lamp to around 500 Celsius on your heat projector. So the temperature of the filament of the piece of metal inside has dropped dramatically, further away from sunlight. And the further away from sunlight it becomes, the more unnatural the wavelengths are that it emits, the photons that it emits as light. And we call those photons on heat projectors, we call them infrared B and C. Now you'll notice on the box it says infrared A, and that's because technically there is a small amount of infrared A in the region of 2% of the output is infrared A. But the vast majority of the output is infrared B and C. And infrared B is actually not really seen in sunlight.
Mm.
Infrared C isn't seen in sunlight, but infrared C is seen in nature in the re-radiation from the rocks and the environment.
Like my basking platform.
Exactly that, yeah. So that is re-emitting infrared C. And infrared B is a very minuscule part of sunlight. And essentially what the heat projector is just infrared B for all intents and purposes. It's infrared B and a little bit of infrared C. And it's an unnatural lamp, essentially. It's not replicating sunlight at all. And worth me saying, when I say lamp, I know in the States you guys refer to the dome. You call it the bulb on the inside. When I say lamp, I mean the bulb.
Okay.
So that's if anyone listening, if I say lamp, what I'm referring to is the bulb that you screw in. That's the lamp. And there's
What do you call a lamp then? Do you call it a fixture?
A fixture or a dome.
Okay, I do say that. I say fixture. So
yeah, it's an interesting. We have the joke in the electrical world is that a bulb is something you plant in the ground when you want daffodils, and a lamp is a lamp emits light.
You light bulb nerds.
I know, proper nerd. So yeah, so when I say lamp, what I'm referring to is the bulb, just to cover that, because I know I'm already saying it without realizing. Yeah. So what we're trying to do, or what we can agree to try and do, is replicate sunlight in our enclosures. That's what we're trying to do. A heat projector does not do that, and does not add anything that other lamps don't already do, i.e. your heat lamp. If anything, the heat projector adds many unnatural wavelengths to the output, to the overall output of your lighting setup. And thus, to refer to it as a light, or use it as a light source, it's not appropriate. You can use it as a heat source. Whereas your tungsten filament lamp, you should probably try and see it as a light source, not as a heat source. And I know that sounds strange because it gets hot, and it makes the enclosure warm. Of course it does. But actually, what we're trying to get out of that is light. It's a type of light called infrared. Now, infrared, people again associate that with heat, but it's not heat. It's a type of light. And from in terms of the sun, it's around 30% of sunlight is infrared IRA, and it's the interesting thing about the deep heat, if you like, from Arcadia. See, the term deep heat projector it's owned by Arcadia, but they exist in a few different forms. It's a carbon filament lamp. They exist in the deep heat projector, which is the Arcadia version. There's infrared heat projector. There's deep heat emitters. There's all different, but they're all the same. It's essentially the same. There's a carbon filament lamp. Zoomed sell them. Zilla sell them. They all sell them. That can be seen as a heat source, i.e. a way of increasing temperature in your enclosure, but should never be seen as a basking lamp, because it's not something that an animal should be forced to bask under, because the wavelengths aren't natural. And the idea of the deep heat penetration, the deep into the tissue, is almost completely false. We know that the peak wavelength of penetration into tissue is around 1,100 nanometers. Now, that's again a technical term that you don't need to know, but the peak number we're looking for is 1,100 nanometers, approximately. The amount of energy that a heat projector emits in that area is less than a fraction of a percent. So that peak deep penetrative energy essentially doesn't exist on a heat projector. Essentially not there. And ironically, the peak wavelength of an incandescent light source, so your 25-watt heat lamp, is around 1,100 nanometers. It's the perfect peak wavelength. And we know, because it acts like a black body, it's a tungsten filament, acts like a black body, because the peak wavelength is 1,100 nanometers, we know that is emitting plenty of infrared B. So there's no need to supplement the infrared B. Again, people can look at something called Planck's law, and there's much more science to this. But essentially, if an incandescent lamp is emitting a peak wavelength of 1,100 nanometers, it's around 2,500 Celsius, 2,500 Kelvin-ish. We know that it's emitting plenty of infrared B just because of the way black body works, because of the way the physics works. So there's no need to supplement it. That's the other thing, is they try and say when they're selling it is, oh, this supplements your infrared B. There's no need to supplement infrared B. If you've got a heat lamp turned on, there is arguably already too much infrared B, so you don't really need to supplement it at all. And you know that your heat lamp is providing the right wavelengths to penetrate through the skin.
Would it be accurate to say that the heat emitter is acting more like a stone that has absorbed heat from the sun and is now re-emitting it?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's that is exactly it. That's what a heat. The ceramic heat emitter, they usually come in like a circle, and it's got like a weird coil. Essentially, that works in the same way. Again, inside that, if you smash one open, inside that is a filament.
Okay.
And the filament is just, rather than it being glass in an glass envelope, it's just in a ceramic envelope. And the ceramic absorbs it and re-emits it as infrared C, mostly infrared C. And that is actually, ironically, more natural than a heat projector, because in nature, that's what happens.
Yeah.
In nature, nothing really emits infrared B. Nothing's hot enough to emit infrared B. You don't go around and see that weird red glow on the rocks. They don't get that hot.
Yeah.
So they don't emit those wavelengths. Again, we can tell the wavelength is emitting because of how hot it is, the temperature of it, the physical temperature. So the ceramic heat emitter is
disappointing.
around 200 Celsius. Yeah, it is disappointing. Yeah.
I spent so much money.
I know. Now you can use them, and they do come in useful with certain setups, and the setups tend to be a mesh top enclosure, where if you're putting a ceramic on top of the mesh, the ceramic heat emitter, because of the way infrared C works, it'll just be dissipating out into the room. It'll be warming up the room as well. It's less efficient in that sense. If you want to get the heat into the enclosure, then a heat projector would do that, would get that infrared into the enclosure.
But what I want is I want optimal, and I want to try to recreate basking. So I'm switching over to bulbs.
Yes.
You know, my room doesn't get down to 52 degrees, so I'm not worried about my boa constrictor being in a 72-degree room at night. You know, I'm not concerned about that. I was initially. In my mind, I was thinking like, no, they need heat, you know, all night long. And then I was talking to Lucas Lee, and he was like, you know, in nature, sun comes up, it gets hot, sun goes down, it cools off. You know, they're not sitting out in the sunlight all day long. And he said, if you have a healthy animal, you shouldn't run into any issues. And that's exactly how he keeps a lot of his animals, that all the heat goes off at night. And he said, and they're fine. And his house, or his apartment, gets pretty cool at night. And he's keeping boas and all sorts of pythons and everything. And so this kind of opened up my eyes, like, maybe I was gripping on, like, because I was invested, you know, I was financially invested, and I read the package. And so, you know, I'm like, well, Arcadia wouldn't lie to me. And it doesn't sound like, I'm not going to say that they didn't lie, right? What they said is accurate. It's just not at the levels that is ideal.
Correct. Yeah. So I think there's obviously a fine line between them just actively lying, but there is it's indicative of a level of understanding from them, I think. So I think when they first launched it, they didn't know. They launched it as this life-changing product. In fact, the Arcadia book Fire, near enough said that you could replace all your heat lamps with this thing, and you can't do that at all.
That's literally what I did.
Yeah, that's essentially what the book says to do. No, it doesn't. That isn't how it works, right, in the real world. And I think that was mainly originally down to a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge on it. Then came the concept that we should look more into this a little bit more, and that started to happen. And then, and I need to be careful what I say here, then it almost became a case of, you need to look at it from two perspectives. You need to look at it from the perspective of, firstly, the people who make those products at Arcadia, who design the products, or you could say design the products, but the people who market the products at Arcadia, whether they are lighting specialists or whether they work for a brand whose primary focus is to make money selling products that they've invested into. And it costs a lot of money to invest into the development of the heat projectors, and you need a return on that investment. So you need to sell those lamps as much as you can. So then it becomes a question of, were we then lied to a little bit further down? Now, lied to may be a strong word, but we know for a fact that it was earlier this year, it was in June-ish time, the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK actually advised Monkfield, which is the company that owns Arcadia. Arcadia is just a brand name for Monkfield is the actual company. Advised Monkfield that they need to change the wording they use on the website. And they changed the wording they used on the website because they told them it was misleading, because it was found to be untrue what they were saying on the website. And that was only this year. Now, bear in mind, we've known the truth, if you like, for 2 or 3 years now at least. So again, I'm not saying they were lying. Maybe they were just taking the time to change things. But you need to look at it as well from a business perspective of it's a return on investment. If they've spent a lot of money developing this product, paying a factory to make it, and then copywriting the name, like I say, the term deep heat projector is a copyright. So that costs money. All the marketing, the book, all that sort of stuff goes into marketing this product to get it sold. And then for it to be found out that it's not doing what they say it is, in the levels that they originally said it was doing, is controversial. And and this isn't just an Arcadia thing, this is all brands, this is whether they always need to consider the profit margins at the end of it, right? At the end of their annual sales figures, have we sold enough lamps? Have we sold enough product? Which is why I have in the past turned down jobs working with specific brands, because I know that is ultimately what drives it. It's the bottom line. And I wouldn't be okay putting my name to products that I'm not comfortable with. Whereas some people are more than happy to do it. I know some people who have fairly recently, in the last 12 months, taken up jobs at some pretty big brands in the UK, some reptile brands, and have openly said to me, we have products coming out that I do not like, but I need to sell them because the boss says we need to sell them.
Yeah.
So that's another side thing, is to always take everything that they say with a pinch of salt and always ask for independent reviews of stuff, which is one of the things that I do, is independent product analysis. I do that kind of separately in my own time. And that's one of the things I do as part of the consulting service as well, is independent product analysis. And I will tell brands, I don't like this product, and I'll tell them up front. Often they don't like me saying that, but that's what I do.
So and Arcadia is I love their products. I mean, I don't
want this to turn into an attack on Arcadia. Arcadia do some fantastic products.
Absolutely.
The heat projector is not one, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I've heard that their T5 lamps, I guess you would say, are
tubes.
The T5 tubes are very high quality, and that they put out UV longer than most other bulbs on the market. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So a T5 lamp or tube is a fluorescent tube light, and they historically, I mean, like I say, Arcadia has been going for a while, but they all work in the same way. All these fluorescent lights, even the compact fluorescent lights, work in the same way. It's a glass tube coated with a phosphor on the inside, like a special coating, and mercury on the inside of the lamp ignites and vaporizes and causes, essentially, there's a few things to this, but essentially causes the phosphor to glow, to fluoresce, and that's the light that you get. And depending on the mix of chemicals that you use in that phosphor coating, that changes the output of the light, as in the wavelengths that it emits. And the Arcadia ones have historically, up until around August last year, been made by a factory in Germany called Sylvania. And they're actually, up until August last year, they were actually made, it was the exact same product as the Zoomed Reptile T5s, the exact same.
Really?
Product. Yeah, you can see the same batch code on them and everything.
Oh, no kidding. Now, when you say Sylvania, that's like the same company that you get your headlight replacement bulbs from?
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, weirdly, it's one of those weird conglomerate companies.
Sure.
But yes, it's that company. Yes, it's like Mitsubishi, right? So where some of them make motorbikes and some of them make
air conditioners.
Units. It's like completely separate. But yes, it's the same company. It's Sylvania, and they're based in Germany. Or they are based in Germany. I'll just have a quick drink.
Okay, so that is interesting, and I do love my Arcadia products and all that, and I don't want to throw too much shade on them and everything, and like you said, it's an investment on their part, and then at that point you're kind of married to all this packaging and literature and advertising and all these things, and what are you supposed to do? And obviously rolling those things back is going to take time. And
absolutely.
So it's, and then even so, I mean, you look at, the products, that product packaging is probably going to be out on the market for quite a while before that stock is actually sold out.
Yeah, even if you did the only way to do it is to really do a recall, and even then, stuff still lands on the shelves. I've got recalled products that are still I bought on the shelf still. So it's, yeah, I mean it's never if tomorrow the government decided that heat projectors were dangerous somehow, they're not, but if they somehow and they needed to recall it, you'd probably still find heat projectors on the shelves in 3 months' time, right? Even if they did an immediate recall, it still wouldn't happen very quick.
Okay.
I want to reiterate, it's not an attack on, because the same product exists from ProRep in the UK, from ZoomEd in the US, Zilla, Pangea, I'm pretty sure have their own. They're all the same, right? They're all just as bad, if you like, as each other. But they do have uses. They do have a use. You can use them to increase temperatures in your enclosure, and especially in some settings where a ceramic isn't appropriate because it could be that it's too far away or it's above a mesh. There are instances in which those lamps can be used, but they aren't nearly as much as the product is marketed for, in my opinion.
Okay. All right. And now, so my setups now, I'm waiting on an order of these, what is it? Did I say Exoterra? Yeah,
you said Exoterra,
yeah. So I'm waiting on an order of those to come in. It seems like, 25 watts is kind of the sweet spot. Now, what I was going to do was just get 50 watts and dim it down. Is there any drawback to doing that, to getting a higher wattage bulb and then dialing it back with a dimmer?
Yes. Because what you're doing is lowering the temperature of the filament on the inside and thus shifting it further away from sunlight. If you remember, sunlight is 5,500. The incandescent light is around 2,500. As soon as you dim it, you're dropping that temperature. You're physically lowering the temperature of the filament. And when you do that, you shift the spectrum further away from sunlight. And you're essentially making it into a deep heat projector at that point when you dim it down. You can dim 10%, but I wouldn't really go much more than 10%. So I always say it's better to run a 50 watt bulb at 100% than it is to run a 100 watt bulb at 50%. Always try and run your heat lamp, or infrared A lamp is what it should really be called, at full power. And the reason for that is a quick way of getting your head around that, or at least in my opinion when I explain it to people, is if you see it as a light source and not a heat source, you would never dim your LEDs in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
At the height of the day, for example, you would never dim your LEDs down. So don't dim your heat lamp down either. You can dim your ceramic heat emitter down, and you can dim your heat projector down, because those are heaters. But your incandescent, quote unquote, heat lamp, your incandescent light source, is a light source. So you want it to turn on at the start of the day and off at the end of the day. Okay. And equally, you don't want to dim it up at the start of the day either, because that's a strange way of doing it. Again, that's to do with the change in spectrum over the shift of temperature, which is an interesting one. It's easier to do when I show it on a visual, because you can see the shift in spectrum happen, and it becomes more or less like sunlight as you change the temperature of the filament.
So the place where you would want to use a heat emitter or a deep heat projector would be if you have a drafty reptile room and you need that overnight heat, because it's getting down to whatever 40, 50 degrees at night, and you don't want your boa to get that cold. Yeah, then you can provide that sort of supplemental heat source, and that would sort of mimic the heat that you might get out in nature, right, where all the rocks and surfaces
and even the atmosphere itself gets warm. The particles in the air are heated by infrared C, so those are hot, as in the air is physically warm. The water molecules in the air are physically warm, so you want to replicate that in the enclosure if you need to, which is where either you're living in a place where there's a drafty basement and you need to keep the place warm, or you could be doing what I do, which is where you're in a zoo in the north of England in the winter time and you're keeping a giraffe, and that's an animal that comes from the desert or near enough your sub-Saharan Africa, and we're keeping them in minus 12 degrees, right? We need to warm that space up without the light, so we need to use a radiator of some kind, or big ceramic heat emitters or big gas heaters. Essentially, we need to warm the air up. That's
Sure.
what we're doing. Same with birds. It's really bad with birds because birds, they get bloody cold, and they tend to be, some of them tend to be very, very, very silly, where they'll sit out in the cold and just completely not realize that their feet are freezing, and they'll get frostbite on their toes, and you'll see them picking at the toes, and then you start to say what's going on. And luckily, if it's recall trained, you can recall it and have a look. If it's a big eagle that's not recall trained, then it's a bit more of a nightmare. So you need to consider other things of how you do it, which is something we're working on at the moment, is how we can get these bloody birds to stop freezing their toes off. But that's
I'm surprised you guys don't have heated perches.
well, that's what we're looking at. Yeah.
Oh, really?
And how to heat them efficiently and properly, but also have it so the bird will actually sit on it and not attack the heated perch, which is something they just like to do for whatever reason. It's they're really strange. We've tried pipes, like metal, like the sort of stuff you would use when you're putting up scaffolding, like those sort of things, filled with sand, and then a heat cable on the inside. But then it's metal, so in the summer it gets really hot.
Yeah.
You can wrap it in stuff. We're trying all sorts of stuff. We're trying drilling out a block of wood, like with a really long drill bit, and then putting a heat cable through that and using wood. And eventually they do pick at it, so you need to replace it once every couple of months. We're trying all sorts of creative things. It's really fun, but that's something we're working on in the background. It's an interesting one. But that's an instance where I use a heat projector or a ceramic heat emitter in an indoor place to kind of just get an area of warmth at night, especially here at night because it's freezing.
Yeah. You guys, I mean, Florida, here it was down in the 40s the other night, but it's the temperature inside the house doesn't come up or drop that quickly.
No.
So how do completely nocturnal animals, like for instance, knobtail geckos, how do they benefit from UVB being provided?
It's a really good question. And it's multifaceted as well, because UVB in the wild is never on its own, and UVB is in terms of the part of the solar spectrum. If you go outside and measure the solar spectrum, UVB is less than 0.5% of sunlight. It's a really, really small amount of sunlight. It's very important, but it's minuscule, and it's a part of a much bigger, wider spectrum of light. So providing UVB on its own is a step, which actually is very difficult to provide UVB on its own, because most of the lamps provide some sort of other light, so visible light or UVA. But for the sake of this, we'll say you've got some knobtail geckos and you've stuck a T5 lamp over them. That animal will definitely benefit from that, but I think from my perspective, the idea would be to step away from providing UVB, caveat, and move towards providing an actual full spectrum. So provide your UVB, provide your UVA, provide some visible light, and provide infrared A, because those are the four parts of sunlight, major parts of sunlight. And providing one of them on its own, it will benefit them, but it's not really doing what we're trying to do. As we agree, we're trying to replicate sunlight, and sunlight isn't just UVB. But to put that into more perspective, we have ZSL London Zoo. We have some Sicilians, which are little underground animals. They're provided with full spectrum lighting, and they're fossorial. They're completely fossorial. The UVB has other effects on the environment that may not be specific to the animal. Now, we all know that UVB causes the subcutaneous synthesis of vitamin D. But if the animal doesn't bask, then it may not do that. But what it does still do is have those antifungal effects, antiviral effects on the environment, and causes other domino effects onto the animal longer term. It may be that the insect they eat is out in the sun, and we know that insects subcutaneously produce vitamin D as well, just the same. So it may be that down the food chain, the vitamin D is coming from that rather than subcutaneous within the animal. But not only that, there is other benefits to it as well. We know that very rarely animals are fully nocturnal. Some will come out at sunrise and sunset. In fact, most that we consider nocturnal are actually crepuscular. They'll come out at sunrise and sunset. And there is UV in a sunrise and a sunset. You can measure it; it's measurable. So it's there. So if in doubt, try and replicate the sun. And good that you're using the word benefit and not requirement, because they don't require UVB in theory, but they also don't require substrate. You can keep them in a plain glass bottom with a plastic tub as a hide, and that's fine. But nobody would say that's a good welfare state for the animal. And the same way you could say a horse doesn't need to go out in a pasture in a field. It could stay in a stable, right? It would survive if it stayed in a stable and very happy, but it would stay in a stable. The same thing you could say about this. It's less about providing what they need, quote unquote, and more about improving or increasing the welfare state of the animal. And does providing UVB alongside other light increase or improve the welfare state of the animal? Yes. Absolutely, and it does with all nocturnal animals, not just reptiles. It does it with eyes. We provide UVB for our eyes in zoos. Those nocturnal primates with the big long fingers.
Yeah, creepy.
They get UVB. Yeah, they're creepy, but they get UVB. The difference between a nocturnal animal and a diurnal animal is that a nocturnal animal has its eyes closed when the sun is out, but so do I sometimes. If I go and sunbathe, I'll have my eyes closed. That doesn't mean I'm not getting the benefits anymore.
Yeah.
It's about whether they have access to it in the wild, and the answer is yes. So should we provide it? Yes. Do they need it? Probably not, but they also don't need a lot of other stuff. That knobtail gecko could. Are they insectivores? I think they're insectivores, right? That it could probably live off mealworms entirely.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be a very good diet. Nobody would say it could almost certainly live just off mealworms. But that wouldn't be for me to say, does it benefit from also eating a few duvia roaches and crickets? Yes, absolutely, it does benefit from that. The same way that providing light does benefit the animal.
Okay, so for even fully nocturnal animals, you would say it would be beneficial to provide full spectrum lighting.
Absolutely. When I say full spectrum, I refer to my personal definition of that, which is an actual full spectrum, so UVB, UVA 1 and 2, visible light, and infrared.
And that's what I have in this cage here now, right? Now that I'm doing the 25 watt basking lamp and my 6% shade dweller UVB bulb.
Yeah, it's a very good question. If you ask me in my if you want my honest answer, the answer is no.
Oh shit.
If you ask me in my you're a beginner and I want to make sure that you're not shoved out of the hobby because we're purists, then I would say you're doing great. But from what you've said, you want to enhance that. So I would say there is definitely room to enhance that. Significant room. I'm assuming you've not measured the lux in the enclosure.
No.
The lux. So a lux meter is $30 on Amazon. They're really cheap.
Okay.
And the lux in full sun in Brazil, Argentina, where boas come from, assuming it's a imperator or a constrictor of some kind, the lux, if you go out in the full sun, the lux will be around 120,000 lux, maybe even higher.
Okay.
The lux under a heat lamp and a UV lamp is around 3,000 lux, 4,000 lux. So that's 4,000, we'll give it the benefit of the doubt, 4,000 lux versus 120,000 lux. So the lux is, for all intents and purposes, the brightness of the room, of the enclosure. So the brightness in full sun of your basking spot, which is what you're trying to replicate the sun with, is orders of magnitude less bright than the sun. And that is free energy. From in nature, that is energy. For every meter squared, so about that much, for every meter squared of space outside in the full sun, there is 1,000 watts of energy. 1,000 watts, a kilowatt. That is a lot of energy. It's free, because it comes from the sun, and all life has evolved to utilize every single bit of it. We know that because we see things like vitamin D, we see things like metabolism effects, we see things like the healing of skin. There's energy that's being applied to the body and becoming used in some way, even if it's not direct, like I say. So it could be energy that's being turned into sugars by plants, which are then eaten by animals. So the sun is the start of the food chain in 100% of cases. And if you're trying to replicate that, then in theory, what we should be doing is replicating it in proportion. Now, it's very difficult to get 120,000 lux in an enclosure because man-made lights are very inefficient. Even the brightest LEDs we've got aren't very efficient in the grand scheme of things. So
also, you probably wouldn't want to provide that, right? Because a lot of the boas, they're under a tree canopy, right? So they're getting a lot of filtered light.
Yes, they do get a lot of filtered light, but even then, they always have access to a patch of sunlight that is full bright sun. Now, so in theory, if you had a room big enough and a space big enough and energy wasn't a problem, and we had a light that could produce 120,000 lux at a reasonable distance, then yeah, I would provide a spot of that, definitely.
Yeah.
Now, in the real world, we live in a real world, that isn't going to happen. So I tend to say try and aim for 40 to 60,000 lux at your brightest point, i.e. your patch of sunlight in your enclosure. 40 to around 50,000, 40 to 60,000 lux is a good level of lux. But you have to take lux into with a pinch of salt, because lux is a human measurement of light. So it's about the way that humans see light. And we know that reptiles perceive it differently to humans do. We know that reptiles, regardless of what they do with it, we know that they have different photoreceptors to humans. We have what we call the three cones, which are the red, green, and blue, long, medium, and short wave cones, red, green, and blue color. All reptiles, all of them, have evolved another photoreceptor that can see what we call UVA1, which is a different color. And UVA1 is a part of the spectrum that is just not provided in most setups, even under T5 lighting or an incandescent light. It's not really provided at all. So that enclosure is almost certainly probably not white to the animal either, because they need that photoreceptor to be active in order to see white. The same way we see white when we see red, green, and blue together. We see all three of those together. All three cones are activated. We see what we perceive as full white, full color. In order for them to see full color, they need, depending on the species, they need different cones, but also a UVA cone to be activated. And that is not activated under, I'm going to throw a number out here, 99% of enclosures, because we just don't provide UVA. And I know heat lamps say UVA on the box, and that's another lie. And I know that T5 lamps say 30% UVA on the box often. They'll often say it provides 30% UVA. The UVA that a T5 provides is what we call UVA2, which is actually a completely different type of light. Wow. Annoyingly, we've categorized UVA as one big thing. And to say UVA, when it's actually the different biological effects of UVA, I tend to split them into UVA 1 and 2. UVA 1 being our longer wavelength UVA and UVA 2 being our shorter wavelength. Again, these are technical terms that people don't need to know. But to say that UVA is all the same thing and to categorize UVA as one thing would be like, well, so let me do the math. It's around 80 nanometers it covers the term UVA. It's around 320 nanometers to around 400 nanometers. So 80 nanometer span. If we convert that to visible light, we could say 500 nanometers, which is a sort of turquoisey color, to 580, which is 80 nanometers away, is like bright yellow. So to say that UVA is the same would be like saying turquoise is the same as yellow. They're just completely different colors. So UVA at both ends of its extremities is completely different. It's turquoise and yellow different. So UVA 1 is our color, if you like. It's a visible thing to reptiles and to birds and quite a few mammals. And UVA 2 is more associated with vitamin D, the same way UVB is. So when a T5 lamp is producing 30% UVB, sorry, UVA, it's providing a lot of UVA too. And that's to do with vitamin D. Sorry, that was a lot of words and a lot of things. It's really difficult to do this without a visual, but people focus a lot on these specifics, UVB, UVA1, UVA2, this nanometer. This is why I say sack that off, provide the full spectrum in proportion, and you can't go wrong because it's all in the right levels. So if you provide a UVI, which is your index of UVB, essentially, if you provide that at the right level, then you should be providing, say you're providing UVI 3, then you want to provide a lux around 50,000 and an infrared level that's appropriate for that. So around 300 watts per meter squared of incandescent light output. Again, those are numbers. I'm just saying numbers.
Yeah, man, it's a lot.
It is a lot, and I do apologize because I don't have any visual aid to kind of show you. So I'm just throwing numbers at you.
Yeah, I don't even know if that would help.
It can be difficult. It's very difficult to wrap your head around, which is why we try and make it as simple as possible by saying a UV lamp and a heat lamp are your basics. You get that, your animal is going to be much better off.
Yeah.
If you then want to improve your welfare, and this is regardless of species, regardless of taxa, if you then want to improve your welfare, focus on improving the lux levels, the light levels in the enclosure, and get those to around 40 to 50 to 60,000 lux.
And this can be done by just adding like an LED light, just supplemental, just basically just try to make it brighter.
Much brighter, yeah, in the same spot. So your sunspot, you want to be brighter, around 50,000 lux. Now, again, lux is a human-based measurement, and lux doesn't take into consideration the UVA.
Yeah.
Whereas a reptile lux, if you like, would take into consideration UVA because they can see the UVA. And the way we can provide UVA, one, with what we call a metal halide lamp, or in the US you tend to call them halides or HIDs. Mm-hmm. They're also called HQIs in Europe. That is a really good lamp for providing visible light and UVA light. The good ones are anyway. The Philips Master Color is really good. The Zoomed HID is really, really good. 70 watts, comes in all in one unit. Really good lamp. And there's also some LEDs that can provide UVA every now and then, but your classic the classic LED bar lamps that you can buy, they are bright to us, but they may not be as bright to your reptile, and they may be colored to your reptile as well. So consider that. People don't like the idea of using colored lamps. The irony being that LED that they're sticking over their animals, it's a colored lamp.
Okay.
So they are.
Now, what about so are you altering the way that your snake or reptile sees the world by offering these different spectrums and everything?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can't ask them what they can see.
Yeah. Well, you can. Yeah. They just won't get back to you.
Yes, you can certainly ask them. They will not let you know.
You can
do preference studies in which you can see whether they prefer to bask under a certain quality of light or spectrum of light. And when we do that with tortoises, they tend to prefer a full spectrum. My definition of full spectrum. You can do that. You can do a preference study and see what they prefer. There's obviously caveats and lots of different things you have to consider when you're doing things like that before you even get into the ethics of doing it. But what we do know is that they, for example, this UVA cone, we know they have a photoreceptor in the eye that has evolved for a reason to see these wavelengths of light, these UVA wavelengths. We know that's the thing, right? You can see them if you go under a microscope and cut open a snake's eye or a gecko's eye. They have UVA photoreceptors that respond to UVA. That is a thing in all these animals, and we know that UVA exists in a certain proportion in sunlight. And we know that it doesn't exist in the same proportion in many setups. So as soon as you in those setups, that animal is not being exposed to proportional levels of UVA to visible light, and thus is probably not experiencing what we would call white light. They're probably experiencing some sort of colored enclosure. So equivalent to, not quite the same as, equivalent to you having red lamps on, where everything looks that kind of washed out red color. Not quite the same because there are other colors present, but akin to that. And we know that with humans, that doesn't look good. Now, does it hurt us? Would we die under a red lamp if we lived under a red lamp? Probably not. No, it wouldn't be very high quality of life, but we'd survive. We'd eat and we'd breed, which people tend to use as markers for quality of life nowadays. We could live under a red light perfectly fine. And so could a snake or a gecko or anything. Ironically, when we're providing them what we tend to provide, which is incandescent T5, we're giving them essentially that. Yeah. It's white to us as humans. So as the keeper, it looks white and nice. To the reptile, it probably doesn't. Now you can supplement this by, this is one of the biggest arguments I see, is people saying, well, I have light that comes through the window. But glass attenuates a lot of UVA. We don't see it. To us, it's perfectly clear, the glass. But to a reptile, it's probably tinted. All the glass is tinted. Not only that, it's going through a window and then glass on the enclosure as well. Yeah. So it's going through lots of levels of glass. There's probably high attenuation going on.
Is there any benefit to having windows that natural light come through for the quality of life for the animal?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, everything I say comes with caveats. There are risks. Obviously, you can't, pure sunlight coming through a window will get hot, and you need to consider temperatures and things like that. But if we ignore that and we consider the potential benefits, yes, absolutely. It's bright. Now, direct sunlight, again, temperature, there is a risk. But yes, you know in the morning when you open the curtain, the room is brighter, you want to wake up. It makes you want to wake up. Yeah. That's a melanopsin and in the ganglion cells of the eye, at the back of the eye, which are another type of photoreceptor that are non-visual. It's a photopigment in the eye, not a receptor, sorry. And the ganglion cells respond to around 420 nanometers, which is blue light, which ironically is also the color of the sky. It's that same blue color. And this exists in reptiles. These ganglion cells exist in reptiles. And not only that, many reptiles, and you'll know this, have a parietal eye on the head, which is, people call it the third eye. That is essentially an extension of the pineal gland, which is heaving with these ganglion cells that respond to blue light.
Americans say pineal.
Pineal. Or did I call it pineal gland?
Yeah,
which pineal. Yeah.
Sounds better, honestly.
Well, that thing in the brain, which is, and again, on that gland, on that part of the brain, there are other photoreceptors called the suprachiasmatic nuclei. These are photoreceptors that are non-visual, so you don't know. There's no feedback that you're getting from this. But,
so is that like another added benefit, like going back to the knobtail gecko?
Yeah.
That for it having the light there, if it were to, let's say, wake up from its slumber, at noon, and it sees the light, it would say, oh, it's still, I need to go back to sleep.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the same way you do, if you wake up in the middle of the night and I don't know about you, I've gotten rid of all clocks and everything in my bedroom because
you go, what bloody time is it? Yeah, what time is it? Yeah.
It messes with me. So I go more off of, is there a little bit of blue light coming through the curtains? And if there is,
it's exactly what's happening. Yeah, that is exactly what's happening. It's also happening on an unconscious level inside your head. Yeah. So you're not consciously aware of it happening, but you'll know that your body will start to form a circadian rhythm. If people who go wild camping and live for months in the wild, they form a circadian rhythm that matches sunlight for a diurnal animal. And it's that is happening completely unconsciously within our animals all the time. So yes, providing any beneficial light, any added light to your animal will be beneficial. So, and sunlight is the king of all beneficial light. So you can provide sunlight, then yes.
It like just the thought of let's say you were a ball python breeder or a royal python breeder.
Yeah.
And you had a facility that they're all in tubs, and I'm not demonizing tubs. I understand that there's people that are running businesses and you know, hopefully they're selling individual animals that will go to keepers that are going to try to give a higher quality of life to the
Yeah,
animal.
yeah, yeah. That's the tubs is a debate for another day. Yeah,
Sure, yeah, and but if they're in the tubs and you know they're only getting light when when people are in the room doing maintenance, you know, like just the thought of that. And of course I'm putting my human emotions into a snake. It's so depressing, right? You know, but you
yeah.
know you can't. And I don't know what snakes feel. You know, I have no idea what they feel. I have no idea. I know what my dog feels. You know, I know what my dog feels when I get home from work and he's spazzing out and he's so excited to see me. And then I take him outside and he gets his zoomies out and he's just
Mhm.
going in circles out in the yard, you know, and then we're fighting over sticks and you know, running around together. I know I can understand that, right? Because it's so obvious and so clear, but we're not getting that from our snakes.
Yeah, the feedback is different. Yeah,
It's totally different. You
yeah.
know, now granted, I have an Argentine boa, and I've talked about this before, that when I come in the room, she starts pressing and trying to get out of the enclosure.
Yep.
Right. And
My boa does it every to the point where it's every Sunday, because in the summer we go out on a Sunday and I take him out and I take him out on I live on like a nature reserve and I take him out to the point where he even knows what bloody day of the week it is. Like,
yeah.
I'm assuming my routine is slightly different on a Sunday, and he knows. And as soon as it's a Sunday, he's like, "Oh, it's that day," and he's pressing against
Yeah.
the glass. Come on,
Yep.
So
And
these
that,
animals do that, yeah.
yeah, and you know, who knows if it's you know, just conditioning or what it is, but at the same time, these there's something going on there, you know,
Well,
in my
the
opinion.
human emotion, at its most basic form, um, it can be stemmed back to what we call the reptile brain, which is our most basic functioning brain.
Yeah.
Emotion is it's just electrical impulses in the brain, and the brain of a reptile or a bird or any mammal is so similar in many of its aspects. The point where you can map out parts of the brain that exist in all animals.
Yeah.
Um, this is one of the things is anthropomorphizing has become a very negative thing, and I think it's gone. It's changing now, very much so, but it became a very negative thing where people said you should not anthropomorphize your animals, and we almost turn them into clockwork. All of our animals, right? You've got things like Pavlovian conditioning and things like that, where we turn them into clockwork, and you know that that's not the case because you've worked with the animal and you know it gets excited or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point where now we focus on, okay, how can we appease those people who hate the idea of anthropomorphizing, but also appease the people who love anthropomorphizing and say that all animals are the same intelligence as humans, when we know that's not. We know those are both extremes of essentially the same scale. And which is why we have now implemented things like the welfare assessments and the 5 domains, which are the essentially an evolution of what we call the 5 freedoms, which is from like the 70s or something. The 5 domains are the more modern version of that. And it's a way of ensuring that we meet the needs of an animal, but also enrich that need, because anyone who has any sense of understanding of the way the world works knows that there is no way on earth those things are clockwork. Even insects aren't clockwork. We know you do preference studies on crickets. There's preference studies on crickets where they give they do the same with fish, right? Little zebrafish, which have no brain at all, according to many people. You put them in a tank and you put half the tank with floating zebrafish in it or with fake crickets in it, and the cricket will go and sit with the other ones.
Huh.
Because it doesn't want to be on its own, or the fish will go and sit with the other fish. You put them in an enclosure. The zebrafish example is really good because it's you put them in a tank where there's a fake gravel bottom, even if it's a picture of a gravel base, versus nothing, and they will always go where the gravel is. They don't like nothing being underneath them white. They prefer there to be texture underneath them. So they have this contextualization of the world and safety and an understanding and maybe even, dare I say, an enjoyment of certain situations. And they prefer it. And if we did that with people, we'd say, oh, he likes that or she likes that. But for some reason with animals, we don't like saying the word like. We say things like, they get a dopamine response. They get a hit of dopamine. Well, that's what liking something is. that's what it is. In humans, we call it liking. We have an interesting perspective on that. But yeah, there are absolute benefits to doing all sorts of things for animals. That's why we focus on enrichment a lot in zoos. There's one of my things as consulting with welfare is, okay, how can we enrich the animal? And whether we, it's in a zoo, if an animal is off show, you can tend to enrich it a lot better because people can do things that, when something's on show, people like things to be natural looking. So you can't put a toilet roll tube in with a snake because people don't like that. But off show, just stick a toilet roll tube in, it's fine. They'll go through it, they'll climb on it, they'll do all sorts. On show, it needs to be painted like a rock and all this sort of fancy stuff.
Now, I've heard the argument, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, that, well, an elephant getting enrichment, while that is important, and an orangutan and all these animals, that is important, but a snake is none of those things. A snake is, it wants to hunt and hide, and it doesn't need any of these things. They'll disappear for months at a time and into a hide hole in nature, and we've seen that. Therefore, they don't require enrichment. They don't require any of these things.
Yeah. Well, they don't require it. They will happily live. Say happily. Happily is a strong word. They will survive in a tub. We know this. So yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. They hunt and they eat and they sleep and they have sex, and that's it. That is the animal. But so do other animals. Like I say, people do that. We keep humans in prison.
Yeah.
And they survive perfectly fine without contact with the outside world. Now, whether they thrive is different. Now, of course, I'm anthropomorphizing. I'm referring back to a person. But the parts of the brain that we associate with feeling good and emotion exist in reptiles the same. The only real part that is different is that we have things like the prefrontal cortex, which is the more outside part of the brain, which just enables higher processing of those things, but it actually also enables disability of those things. We see many mental illnesses. We don't necessarily see mental illnesses in lower vertebrates, if you like, and that's because they don't. The theory is they don't have that part of the brain to be able to have a dysfunction in. I don't necessarily disagree that an animal like a snake, if we take a corn snake or a boa constrictor or any ball python, anything like that, they have a basic need and an instinct that is to eat and to sleep, and they'll hide away. But we know that if you provide an enriching environment and they have the choice to engage with that enriching environment, that increases welfare in every scientific way of the term.
Yeah.
If we want to increase welfare, which in my opinion we should as a welfare consultant, then in fact, one of the main points of the 5 domains is the mental state, and one of the main points of that is the area of choice and the concept that an animal, we know that an animal, when they have perceived control over an environment, so it doesn't necessarily need to be actual control over an environment, but you can say the same for humans, when you perceive control over a situation, you feel more comfortable in that situation. The opposite being no control and thus anxiety. We know that animals, it works the same way, that there are studies on this. And when an animal has perceived control over an environment, i.e. it has choice to do things or not, welfare increases. And that is a measurable level of welfare. And from a zoo perspective, where they're trying to get the zoo license, is a big box to tick. From somebody trying to sell a ball python to say that my animal has high welfare, that's a box to tick. For someone who actually wants to look after their pet snake, that's more than a box to tick, because it's also really good for you to have an enriched snake. You'll see more from your snake. Now, all of these things, massive caveats along the way on everything I'm saying. And of course, any animal under medical supervision is different, and animal under medical supervision, that has to take priority. But from a purely from a welfare perspective, if you want to improve the welfare, people get tied up about the idea of welfare and what it actually means. And whether it's the level of coping or whatever it may be, and people may say, well, my animal copes, it's in a tub and it eats and it sleeps. But those aren't metrics for welfare. Those are metrics for staying alive.
Yeah.
Though when those fail is when you approach a vet. If your animal isn't sleeping or is sleeping too much, or isn't eating or is eating too much, that's a veterinary issue. It's not a welfare issue necessarily. The battle becomes people's ulterior motives of why they're not wanting to engage with improving welfare, and they could be very valid. They could be reasons like, I have 5,000 animals and I need to look after them all. Okay, that makes sense. But for 99% of people who keep a pet ball python, I don't see why sticking a rubber ball in your enclosure for them to go through. You've seen those sort of rubber feeder ball. Yeah. Why wouldn't you want to do that? Because if the animal may engage with it, and when it does, it's engaging, it's enrichment. It's enrichment for you as the keeper. It's fun to watch. And it's enrichment for the animal. You can see they're doing something with it. That is enrichment. That is the basis of enrichment.
And what's a better look from the outside looking in? If you were to have somebody from, we have all these people that are trying to, at least in America, I don't know about we have all these people that want to stop us from keeping reptiles at all costs.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Even though they've never kept them. Now, if you were to take one of those individuals that had this preconceived notion of what a reptile keeper is, and you had the option of bringing them to someone's house with 250 animals in tubs and racks, or you had the option of taking them to someone's house that has, let's say, 30 animals that are in enclosures with lighting, and you can take them out and say, this is my, whatever boa, and give, talk about the animal and maybe its personality and all that, and let them hold the animal, versus saying like, this is this animal, and you pull out the tub and it's taking up maybe like a quarter of the tub space. Yeah. And you say like, this is this animal and it's just fine in here.
It's eating and it's sleeping and it's breeding.
Yeah. Which is, so it's doing just fine. Which example would be better, to expose somebody to?
This is the argument that is very, very valid. Just as much as doing it for the animal, it's also doing it for the greater good of all of us.
Yeah, all of us that want to keep animals, because because it's and even that, keeping animals, is it that's actually a topic of conversation for a lot of people, is that it's wrong to do that, to keep an animal for your own enjoyment. Of course, I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I think that it's good for us to have these animals that have been bred in captivity. I think it's good for the animals in that if something goes wrong in nature, we have a collection, that could potentially reseed the wild.
I perceive it multifold. I think it is a selfish endeavor somewhat to keep animals, because there's no reason for me to keep that animal in a box in my house. As in, there's no legitimate reason other than my enjoyment.
Yeah.
I would be fine without it. But yes, there are genuine benefits, and we know you know this, right? If you've got kids, you know that kids love animals, and it brings people together, and it enables science, and we learn a lot. Much of what we know and we implement into the zoo world is learned from quote unquote the hobby. In fact, dare I say, 40%, 30% of the products that we use in the zoo world are pet products. They're products that are designed for pet keepers. The lighting is the big one, the UVB lighting. There is no zoo-specific UVB lamp that they buy just for zoos. It's the same stuff. They buy the T5 lamps that you buy from the pet shop. They buy the same stuff. And the difference is the fixtures, right? You just need more of them, so you need a bigger fixture. But even then, there's no the UVB fixtures. We use what we call light wave propagation units, like a hydroponic system. Those are hydroponic lamps. That's not a zoo lamp. It's very rare to see a specific zoo product, especially with lighting. There's a few. There's LEDX, which makes some nice LEDs. But other than that, it's pretty driven by the pet world, and the enhancements that we see in products such as UVB lighting are driven by the pet world. The zoos aren't pushing that. The zoos will just buy whatever there is. And a lot of good science and good community happens from pet keepers. Now, whether you consider it a hobby or not is up for debate. I change my mind every 2 days, I think, on that, whether it's a hobby or whether it's pet keeping, the same way I wouldn't really consider keeping hamsters as a hobby.
Yeah.
That's an argument for another day. But yes, there are very valid reasons to keep, for the greater good, valid reasons to keep animals, and to keep exotics specifically, as long as it's done well. And it's an interesting one.
That spectrum that you talked about before, where it's on one side, these animals feel nothing.
Yeah.
They're just, it's clockwork. And then the other end of that spectrum is they are the same as humans. They feel what we feel. They yearn to be around others. They want to feel the sunlight on their face. They want to smell fresh air. They want to go for a walk. All these things, right? In your opinion, is it nuanced, that the answer to that, like to pick a side on that scale?
Yes.
In my opinion, it seems totally ludicrous to pick, because we'll never know. Not yet. Maybe AI will figure out something. But I mean, for right now, it seems like it's got to be somewhere in between those two things, and maybe to different extents on different questions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you could say the same thing about people. You can say that people are very much like clockwork. People do the same thing. We know the bystander effect, for example.
And we love it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. I mean, the government loves it as well. It's this sort of, yes, I think the answer is yes, it is definitely nuanced. We do a lot of work to try and prove that these are animals that are clockwork, and then we do a lot of work to prove that they have deep feeling emotions. But actually, it's almost certainly a sliding scale, depending on the situation that you're looking at. And it's almost certainly a sliding scale depending on the individual. It may well be that you're checking a dog or a cat that is the most robust robot you've ever met, and it may well be that your dog or cat is absolutely useless and cannot be trained. And that's just a dog or a cat. Convert that to other mammals. Convert that to other taxa. Convert that to invertebrates, which is a whole other world. The idea that there are jellyfish which don't have brains is insane to me.
Yeah.
This sort of, and even considering welfare on those things. I was at the Biarza Ectotherms conference 2 weeks ago, I think now, 3 weeks ago, talking about jellyfish welfare. It's like, I don't know where to start.
Don't even get me started on an octopus.
I mean, it's insane. I mean, and then the bad thing about an octopus is that is an animal that almost certainly does have emotion.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to me.
And don't they have like a brain-like organ for each tentacle?
Yeah, essentially it's a bag of brain. Yeah, it's a bag of brain. Yeah, the whole thing is like a brain, and it's evolved that under completely different circumstances to us. In fact, they have different eyes to us, and everything. The way their eye has evolved, their eye actually evolved completely separately to the vertebrate eye. Wow. So their eye, the way the eye is physically, mechanically works, is totally different to ours. The same result. It absorbs light and they get a visual impulse. But it's to even perceive that we say, okay, maybe we're not giving our reptiles UVA. Goodness knows what we're not doing to our octopus, because that is a completely different animal. And that is
well, and then you think about the people that wrap them around chopsticks while they're alive and munch down on them. And it's like, no.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? It's
what's wrong with you?
Yeah, that is insane. It's don't even get me started on the concept of invertebrates are a whole different a whole different ballpark, and I love it, but I hate it because it's scary to me, and I'm scared of going down the rabbit hole with those things a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's so yeah, that spectrum is a big spectrum, and I think that the answer is nuanced. And I think if everybody looked at it from a nuanced perspective, we'd be able to as keepers be more unified. Everybody would be more on the same page to say like, hey, you know what, maybe you're right, but I I breed animals for a living, and I do have to make some compromises, you know,
Yes,
and
and compromise is the Dr. Henry Brames is a German vet, with a nice bespoke look at lighting. His main word that he uses in all of his talks is compromise. This is all about compromise, because we can never replicate the sun. We can never replicate the intricate, nuanced nature of a fully bioactive setup. We can never do that. There's no way. We don't have rainfall in our enclosure, true rainfall. We don't have true sunrise and sunset. We don't have true airflow. We don't have smells. We don't have the differences in seasons in our enclosures. You can try, but it's all about compromise. Every single step of the way, it's about compromising it. And we also have to take into consideration the compromise of what it is that we're doing. So is it in our home? Is it in a zoo? Is it in a breeding facility that is providing to the homes and the zoos? Is it in a pet store? Is it in a rescue center? There are compromises everywhere, and everything has to be on that sliding scale. In fact, it's not even a sliding scale in kind of one dimension. It's like a three-dimensional scale of intricacy of nuance. The whole thing is nuanced. There is no one size fits all for everything. And unfortunately, that makes it very difficult to get people to agree on anything.
Yeah.
Because there isn't a single viewpoint from a perspective of how we should do things. It's like bringing in minimum standards. You say you bring in a minimum standards. For example, you could say a bearded dragon needs a minimum standard of 4x2x2 enclosure, 120 gallon. That's fine. Obviously, medical supervision changes that. But if it's in a pet shop, does that change it? And then you bring in the argument of, okay, it's in the pet shop, it's only going to be there for 3 weeks, maybe. But the bearded dragon doesn't know it's only going to be there for 3 weeks, so should it not still be provided? And then you go, okay, but what if we guarantee that it's only there for 3 weeks? It's only 3 weeks of stress if it's in a smaller enclosure. Or how do we guarantee we're giving it to someone who's going to give it that size enclosure and who's going to look after it? And all these little nuances almost becomes an individual basis for each animal, which is partly why I deal with consulting on an animal basis for zoos. It's a difficult task.
Yeah, and I mean, my animals, I grow them out in racks in tubs. You know, I've had a couple animals now that I've put them in larger enclosures and they stopped eating. You know, so then it's okay. You know, and even with ample cover and hiding, you know, places everywhere. You know, multiple hides across the thermal gradient and foliage added and all that, and all of a sudden, like, okay, now he's not eating. You know, now he's terrified, and trying to stick it out and work through that until eventually I was just like, you know what, let's just move you back to the tub and we'll keep you there for a little bit. And then I moved him back to the enclosure, and now he's doing great in the enclosure as he got a little bit more size and confidence.
So it's an interesting behavior from snakes, is this the upping or upgrading, if you like, of size of enclosure. It is it's certainly one that we consider. Have you ever tried putting the tub in an enclosure and just
not yet
keeping it in a tub, but keeping the tub in an enclosure slightly open so that it can come out and there's choice?
Yeah.
And then you introduced an increase in welfare because it has the choice. And if it wants to stay in the tub, it'll stay in the tub. If it wants to come out and explore, even when you're not in the room, it will do that if it wants to. And you're minimizing that's essentially a guiding step between moving from a tub to an enclosure, is just put the tub with a lid, with a gap in the enclosure. And then the animal instantly has a choice. The big argument I always see about people who keep long-term in tubs or in rack systems is that they don't need any more space. And the first thing I always say to that is, okay, leave your enclosures open then. If it doesn't need more space, it doesn't want to come out, leave your enclosure open because it won't come out. And nobody would ever do that in the right mind, because that's insane, because it will escape. Well, then that tells me that it wants to get out more.
Yeah.
The idea of a small enclosure to me is a strange one, because the only argument that I can see that's not a nuanced argument in terms of if I need it because I only have so much space. The other argument is they don't thrive in larger enclosures, and it's like, okay, well, they don't thrive when they have space, and it's like, okay, well, open the enclosure then, prove it.
It's funny. I actually have a snake. What my boa imperator, when I open her enclosure, she'll just stick the front 2/3 of her head out and just hang out like that for hours. She'll never come out. She will not come out of the enclosure, and without me going in and scooping her out, and it's but there's other ones that, man, if I open that up, they're coming out, and they usually have a favorite place where they're going to go to.
Yeah, exactly that. They say there's two kinds of keepers as well. There's people who've had a snake escape, or two types of snake keepers. There's people who've had a snake escape, and liars, because they'll tell you they've never had a snake escape. And everyone's had a snake escape. And my ball python's got out 2 or 3 times now, and every single time she's up on this top shelf in the top corner, like every single time. And I have CCTV in the room, and you can see her doing it. She's not got out since, so that's quite good. But yes, it's a even you can give them a large enclosure, but they do still want to explore. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? What was driving that? Well, maybe it's a lack of enrichment.
Yeah.
It's an interesting concept.
Yeah. So what we got on quite the philosophical tangent there.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
No, that's all right. That's what we're here for. So what about LED UVB and T5 UVB? What's the difference? Is one, and I think I have this. Okay, yeah, that's the next question. So for right now, UVB versus T5HO. I'm sticking with my T5 bulbs. I like them for a couple reasons. A, they give off heat, which I actually like. Gives off supplemental heat in the enclosure. Yeah. So that's kind of a nice ambient heat emitter. Now with the UVBs, in my mind as well, they're newer. They're not as well researched. Is there more danger with the LEDs? Because for me, I'm just saying tried and true. We know what we're getting with the T5HOs. Yes. So I'm just sticking with that.
So it's a really good question. I'm a co-author on what I believe to be the only published paper on the subject. Lead author was Dr. Serena Wunderlich. It was Dr. Serena Wunderlich, myself, and Dr. Francis Baines. And the paper is, goodness me, I can't remember the name of the paper. It's words to the effect of identifying the risks of non-solar spectra in UVB LEDs. And in order to make this make sense, a little bit of housekeeping. When I say the term LED, what I mean is an individual diode. So if you look at an LED, which I've got one here, if you look at it, oh, that's a prototype, don't look at that. If you look at these are the LEDs, right?
Yeah.
These little pieces here. That is an LED lamp. The whole thing is an LED lamp.
Mm-hmm.
So when I talk about LEDs, I'm talking about the specific chip, the diode. When I talk about an LED lamp, I'm talking about the lamp. That'll make more sense, because when I say that UVB LEDs, as in the diodes, are relatively easy to make, but have a risk in that an LED by its very nature can only provide certain wavelengths, or can only provide a broad spectrum of certain wavelengths. They tend to be what we call a very narrow band. So if you get an LED, it's either red, or it's blue, or it's green. The only reason we have what we call white LEDs is because a white LED is actually a blue LED with a phosphor coating on it, and the phosphor then adds the other colors in. So you can either get a diode that is red, or orange, or green, or blue. And if you truly, if we didn't have the phosphors, if you wanted a white light, you would need to have one of each. of those, and it would produce overall a white color. The same way our screens work, right? You have an LCD screen. If you look really close, it's a red, green, and blue diode on the inside, an LED screen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all. It's those three things lighting up, and they make white, or what we perceive as white. LEDs can only produce, LED diodes can only produce a narrow band. And in order to, from our understanding of the science and the biology of it, in order to safely synthesize vitamin D, you need a fairly wide band of wavelengths. You need ranging from around 295 nanometers up to around 350 nanometers in a sun-like proportion. So again, difficult to do without showing it to you, but as you increase the number, so 290, 291, there's a little bit more, 293, there's a little bit more, 295, there's a little bit more, 297, so it goes up and up and up and up, essentially, up to around 350 nanometers, which is UVA 2 that we were talking about earlier. You need to provide all of that in that proportion, in that increasing proportion. UV LEDs are very narrow band, so they cannot provide that whole range. And thus, if you want to provide that whole range, you need a diode that does each bit of the spectrum. So you need a diode that does this bit of UVB, and then a diode that does this bit of UVB, then a diode that does this bit of the border between UVB and UVA, then this bit of UVA, then this bit of UVA. You need diodes for all of it. Multifaceted issue is that the diodes that do the longer wavelengths, the UVA wavelengths, are much more expensive. Much more, I'm talking tens of dollars more expensive. When you're talking $1 for a standard diode, you could be $90 for a UVA diode, right? They're much more expensive. That's for a single diode. Not only that, they're about a fifth as strong. So for every one UVB diode, you need about 5 of these UVA diodes. And they're already 10 times more expensive. So the lamp becomes impossible to make on a realistic scale. It's definitely doable. You could do it if somebody had a couple of £1,000 to spend on the production of this lamp. You could almost certainly do it because it's just light, and we can produce light with LEDs really easily. It's the nuance of the fact that the current technology from the lamp as a whole doesn't allow for multiple of these diodes in one place in proportion of what they need to be to match nature. You can definitely do it. You can get a UVB LED lamp. They exist. There's plenty of them around, but none of them have ever proven efficacy in a scientific study. When I say efficacy, I mean long-term safety. There is a study of an old prototype lamp on some bearded dragons, and what we saw, and this is the issue, this is the risk, is what we saw was even with a low UVI, now UVI, for anyone listening, UVI is just, for intents purposes, it's an intensity of UVB, so the strength of the UVB. At a very low level of UVB, in bearded dragons, which generally we consider to need a high level of UVB, even in a low level of UVB, when provided with these diodes, they produced significant levels of vitamin D in the skin. And in the sun, in the sunlight, if they were at that same UVI, that same intensity of UVB, it wouldn't happen. The body has built into it a natural feedback system, and it's to do with that UVA 2 that I'm talking about. And the natural feedback system stops the body from overproducing vitamin D, stops the body from doing it. So you can't overdose on vitamin D in sunlight. That's impossible. Or the subcutaneous synthesis of vitamin D anyway. However, from what we saw from this study, under these UVB LEDs, or these UVB LED lamps, even at a very low intensity, the body produced significant levels of vitamin D, which implies that there is no stoppage mechanism. There's no regulation happening from the lamp, and that's because they're not providing this UVA 2. They're not providing it because it's difficult to do and it's more expensive and a lot of other reasons. So the danger is that over longer term, we would see an increase and a disproportionate increase and an unregulated increase in the synthesis of vitamin D in the skin, which would lead to hypervitaminosis D, which is toxicity of vitamin D, which produces symptoms that are quite similar to hypovitaminosis D, which is the metabolic bone disease sort of stuff that we see. We see this lethargy, we see eye issues, we see skin issues,
Oh, wow.
lack of eating. No, bear in mind, equally, no UVB LED lamp that I'm aware of has shown that, but no LED lamp has shown not that either. Now, we know that T5s are safe because we've seen the efficacy, we've done the studies. We know that under these lamps, they can't, under the safe ones anyway, they can't overproduce vitamin D. It doesn't happen. That hasn't been tested and proven in with the UVB LEDs yet. Things are in the works. The problem is this costs money to test, and trying to get a brand or a producer to provide you with lamps, and essentially what you're trying to do is prove that they're dangerous. Nobody wants to give you lamps for that. It's a terrible marketing problem. So it's really bad. The other issue is that some of the cheaper UVB LEDs, more of the modern ones are a bit better, but more of the cheaper UVB LEDs, they use an even cheaper diode, LED lamps I should say, they use an even cheaper diode, and the cheaper diode produces peaks at around what we call 297 nanometers, and at any significant close distance to it, 30 centimeters or less, well, even up to 45 centimeters in some of the lamps, you can measure UVC from these lamps, and UVC is deadly to skin and eyes and cells. There are some that are on sale right now that produce that, and people can, I'm not going to name the brand, but people can go on my website and find which brands they are that have.
Jeez Louise. So what is this causing? Cancer or blindness?
We've seen absolutely, without any shadow of a doubt, issues with animals having skin and eye issues from these lamps.
Wow.
And they're on sale, and people rave about them, unfortunately.
Wow.
It is a real shame. Now, the brand, in all fairness, they would say, look, we've used them for years, there's no issue, we've never had any issues, or we don't see many issues. We have thousands of happy customers. That's what they would say to this. And that's fine. But so, Teflon have thousands of happy customers, and that's not a good product either. It's just because you have happy customers that report good findings from the lamps doesn't mean it's good. The science shows that it isn't, unfortunately.
Are we okay? So that's LEDs. What health concerns could we see with a T5 HO like I'm using? What would happen? Right now the basking platform is probably 19 to 20 inches away from the bulb.
Okay.
For like example in these two 6x2x2 enclosures, and I have 36-inch fixtures on there.
Okay.
So half of the cage, the side with the lamp, has the UVB, and then they can retreat from that, and they've got, not only are they're no longer directly under that light, but there's also foliage, so they can
fully get away. Yeah.
Yep. So my 6 foot Argentine boa here, she can just get under that foliage and totally disappear.
Yeah.
And my fear, I don't want to cause any harm to my animals, and there was actually a point in time where I thought maybe I'll just not provide the UVB bulbs and just put in regular light bulbs, because I don't want them to become, blinded or get cancer or anything like
absolutely.
that. And so I always kind of go under rather than over. For instance, I have some 3x2 by 1.5 18-inch tall enclosures being made. And for those, I'm going with 12-inch fixtures, and I'm doing, and those will be directly over the basking platform, and those will have the 2.4%.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, I'm just thinking I'd much rather go under than over. Is that, am I putting too much thought into that?
No, you're certainly not putting too much thought into it. Do you have a solar meter? 6.5.
Not yet, but I've heard I should get one.
Yeah, so the solar meter is your friend when you're doing things like this, because I could say right now, put that lamp 10 inches away, 20 inches away, 30 inches away, whatever it may be. But ultimately, in truth, the percentage from the lamp doesn't really matter, because what you're after is what we call the UVI, which is the intensity, essentially the intensity of light. UVI is actually the amount of erythemally active radiation, which is skin reddening radiation. But for all intents, we can refer to it as an intensity of UVB, and or quantity of UVB, if you like. And we measure the quality of UVB on the spectrum. So the quality is the x-axis, and the quantity is the y-axis. So the UVI is the y-axis, if you like.
UVI is, what does that stand for? UV
ultraviolet index. Yeah,
okay.
It's the same we use for going out in the sun and you put sun cream on when it's over UVI 2 or 3 or whatever it may be. The exact same measurement. Yeah. In fact, the solar meter is designed for doing that in the sun. That's what it's designed for.
Oh my God. I don't even, being in Florida, I don't even want to see that. Like everybody, like skin cancer is inevitable here, and you're going to get it.
No, and it's the erythema that leads to that. So we call it erythema. Erythema is a posh word for skin reddening. And that's what UVI is. It's the erythemally active radiation, the stuff that gives you skin reddening. When you go in the sun, you get sunburn. That's what it is. And it also causes DNA damage, which is what causes the cancer. Now, the shorter the wavelength, the lower the number, in terms of the quality number, not the intensity. The lower the number, the higher the risk of causing the skin issues, the eye issues, the cancer. And we know that sunlight, when measured, starts at around 295 nanometers. Generally, really only around 300 nanometers. And most T5 UVB lamps go down to around that area. So they're safe. They're safe. But only at intensities that the skin has evolved to be under. So if you've got a thin-skinned leopard gecko, it should only be really exposed to the maximum UVI of around 3 or 4 max, because we know that at UVI 3 or 4 in the wild, the sun is out and they've gone off into the caves, right? They're well away. They don't go out in the sun. So we shouldn't really provide that in captivity. You can get a high UVI by going close to your light. So the intensity of the light changes the closer you get. You know this by looking at a light bulb, right? You put a light bulb this far to your eye, it's going to be brighter than this far away. It's the same with UV. UV gets more intense as you get closer. The density of UV, there's more of it as you get closer to the lamp. So you could, in theory, get a 14%, 54 watt, big knockoff lamp. You get 10 of them in a bank, big thing. But if it's really far away, it's providing UVI 2. So your leopard gecko is perfectly fine. If you're, and equally, your 2.4% 30 centimeter lamp this big could be providing UVI 10 if it's that far away, if it's an inch away. So it's the percentage is just there as a guidance. It's also about the distance away from the lamp that you are. And this works with all lamps. This is the same with LEDs. The lux goes up the closer you get. And with incandescent heat sources, the infrared level goes up the closer you get. The density of light goes up. And it's the same way with UV. So what you're looking for, depending on the species, and we have classifications called the Ferguson zones, which we kind of generally put animals into categories, the different zones of intensities of UV. So a Ferguson zone 1 animal, you would give, say, up to UVI 1 around there. So your boa, you may say, okay, this is a Ferguson zone 2 animal. I want to give it up to around UVI 3. Up to around UVI 3. You can go a little bit higher, but up to around UVI 3. So what you want to make sure is that the animal doesn't really have any extended period of time in which it is over UVI 3 or has access to an area that is over UVI 3. So the lamp you choose ultimately doesn't matter as long as your setup enables a UVI 3 in the basking area. It could be that you need a 54 watt 14% or 5 of them if the enclosure is really tall and your basking area is far away. So in terms of we can certainly give guidance on how far away to have lamps. And obviously the other thing that changes it is the reflector that the lamp is in. The tube can be in a different reflector. That changes the output completely. But providing you're using a safe lamp, that is what is ideal. Now, what you don't want to use is any of the cheap imported lamps that don't have the quality side of it. So the intensity may be the same. The irony is that the solar meter doesn't tell you anything about the quality of light, it just tells you the intensity. You could get your UVI meter and put it under a UVC sterilization lamp that you'd use in a hospital to sterilize a hospital room, and it'd give you a reading on your UVI meter. And if I say to you, put your boa under UVI 2.5, you could get a UVC sterilization lamp, put it in, UVI 2.5, that's it, I'm done. But you know that that's a terrible idea because it's emitting mostly UVC.
Yeah.
And that's about the spectrum, that's about the quality of the light and not the intensity. So most of the good brands have good quality, so that the spectrum is good. Something I actually worked on recently, which this isn't an advert, but it's a fun plug just to kind of show what I talk about, is Exoterra bringing out some new T5s. And they have a low, high output, a medium output, and a high output.
Okay.
And what we did with that, what they asked me to do was essentially help them design a new phosphor, a new coating on the inside of the lamp. Because the phosphor coating on the inside of the lamp is ultimately what makes the quality of the spectrum different. And that's ultimately what makes it dangerous or not.
Mm.
And by making it more like sunlight, it becomes less dangerous. So the risk associated with giving your animal cancer is lower. Now, this isn't to say that the current existing T5HOs have a high risk, but they do have a risk. I.e., if you go close to the lamp, you're exposing yourself to those shorter wavelengths or more of them.
Sure.
And the risk goes up. The phosphor blend that I made with Exoterra, with a company in Germany, and we spent well over 18 months developing a phosphor blend, matches sunlight more closely than the current stuff that you see from other brands. And because of that, the quality of light is better. The spectrum is more like sunlight, and there are less of those shorter wavelengths. There are some of them. There's always going to be some, but we've pretty much eliminated the shorter wavelengths that exist in current T5 lamps.
Mm.
And that's really important because it means that the risk has gone down, but the quality of light has gone up, and thus the welfare has increased. So those three things are the main points of those lamps. I think they're out next year, but
good for Exoterra.
It's really good for Exoterra. Yeah, they approached me about it and said, what do we need to do to make a lamp that is more like sunlight? And I said, it's a big job, but we can do it. And we tested lamps from phosphor blends from all over the world and factories all over the world, and we've tweaked some phosphor blends and played with different chemicals. And the lamps are really good. They're I've got the reports on my website, but and that's not a plug. That's just I'm proud of putting in a lot of work on that as well. Sure. But those would reduce the risk even more of that cancer or anything like that. Now, again, the current T5HO lamps are safe, providing they're used within the reasonable limits of the technology.
So basically, I need to get the meter.
Yes, as long as
what brand meter am I getting?
Yeah, so you would only buy the solar meter. Now, it comes in a few skins, so they have different stickers on the front. There's the original solar meter 6.5. There's one called the solar meter 6.5R, which is the same meter, it's just got a lizard on the front. Like identical meter. There's one called the ZoomEd index radiometer, or something. Again, same meter, it's just got a ZoomEd logo on it.
Oh, okay.
There's one from a brand called Lugatti. You heard of those guys?
No.
They're a brand in the US. They have one, again, same meter, just has the Lugatti brand on it. And Josh's Frogs has one as well. Theirs has a little bearded dragon on the front of the Josh's Frogs logo.
But it's the same meter?
Exactly the same meter.
So they're all the same meter?
Those ones are, yes, but there are plenty that aren't.
Okay.
So those are the ones that I would recommend, and you can use them interchangeably. They're all fine.
What are we looking at price point on these things?
With Black Friday at the moment, you're looking at around $200. Okay. For normal time, $250 to $350. Which is a lot cheaper than it is in the UK, because they're handmade in the US, these meters, all of them. They're hand calibrated in the US to NIST standards. And they're the only meters that have proven through many tests, many of which myself, Dr. Serena Wunderlich, and Dr. Francis Benz have been involved in. Yeah. They've consistently shown good quality. We have, when me and Serena did a test God, it feels like not long ago, but I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago now, where we did the largest independent test of these meters, and we got like 100 meters from all over the world. And Dr. Baines brought hers, and the serial number on it is 00002. It's the second one ever made. And it's still tested on average, slap bang in the middle of the average, even though it's 15 years old or however old it is. It's the second one ever made, and it's still bang on perfect for what we need to read. They're all obviously within 10%, but what we found was that they're absolutely consistent, and you don't find that with other meters. Again, the study's on our website. You can read that.
So don't stress out too much over the brand name.
Yeah, as long as it's a solar meter,
yeah,
made by Solar Light Company, and it's a 6.5. Don't think, oh, I'll get the 8.0 because that's a higher number. It must be a newer version. The 8.0 reads UVC and UVC only.
Okay.
The 4.2 reads red. Like they have different meters that read different types of light. What you're after is
solar meter 6.5 should be around $200. If you're keeping animals under UV, is this an absolutely necessary thing to have?
Good question. Necessary, no. Highly recommended, yes. If you're keeping more than 5 enclosures, more than 3 enclosures, then yes, because what it also enables you to do is use your lamps for longer than the brands may say. The brands may say you replace that for 12 months. I've had lamps that are in for 24 months and they're still producing a UVI.
Yeah.
And I double check them with a spectrometer. I have a spectrometer that does a bit more science to it. And the spectrum doesn't shift. The spectrum doesn't change. So you're saving money. I mean, these lamps are $20, $30 a pop. Within 3 years, it's paid for itself if you're not buying new lamps every year.
Yeah, saving money, saving the environment too, less material waste.
Those lamps have mercury in them, so you're definitely saving the environment there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be pushing probably 20 or so enclosures with UV. So yeah, it's going to be.
If next year you need to buy 20 new lamps at $20 a pop, that's a lot of money. Versus a solar meter now, and you could potentially push that another 2 or 3 years.
Maybe I can sell some of these heat emitters I have. And,
I've just given a bunch of mine away to a zoo that needs some for something.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit up some I don't know, maybe I'll try some we have a lot of wildlife rehabilitation and things like that. Maybe they'll be able to use it during the winter for birds.
For winter. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing with them.
Yeah. Okay, so get the meter. Highly recommended. It would be beneficial. It's going to pay for itself probably, especially if you've got for me for sure. And then also I can have peace of mind. Then I'll know exactly what I'm giving the animal and all that.
And you may find that you test the meter and you say, "Shit, I've given way too much UV here."
Oh God, don't say that.
Drop the percentage of the, but drop the percentage of the lamp and then you'll be fine. Or remove the reflector and it'll be fine. Or maybe you're not providing enough. Maybe you go, "Oh my God, it's UVI 0.3. I thought I was going to be giving 3, not 0.3.
Yeah.
Change the lamp out. Go a higher percentage. Try a different brand of lamp. Some of them have a higher output. As long as it's one of the reputable brands.
Yeah.
So you've got Zoomed, Arcadia, Reptile Systems, Leap in the US is a good brand. Mega Ray T5s are good, and the new Exoterra stuff is, in my opinion, the most sun-like, so i.e. the best in my opinion. But they're all safe and all usable and all perfectly good.
I'm gonna have to check that out. The Exoterras. Now my enclosures, they have screen that they're going through too. These are custom reptile habitats behind me.
Yep.
So everything is up away from the animals, and it's up. Everything's contained in the spacer here. So everything is going through the screen. Now that's going to reduce the amount of UV getting through as well, correct?
Yes, it will. So the custom reptile habitats from what I remember, is the hexagonal mesh, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So that blocks, I think, about 25%, 20 to 25% of the light coming through. So if I was to say to you, a lamp unobstructed at 10 inches produces UVI of 1, then you could say it now produces a UVI of 0.75 because it's about a 25% decrease with that mesh in place.
And my heating element is going through that too. Is that reducing the
infrared? It will be doing, yeah.
Okay.
But there is a way of a little bit more nuanced, a little bit bit more of an understanding needed to get your head around it. But there is a way of, again, it's another meter. It's called the ISM 400.
God damn it, another meter.
Yeah. In the States, it's the DBTU 3000 or something ridiculous. There's a few different ones. And that's essentially you're measuring the irradiance from the heat lamp. And if you measure the irradiance from the heat lamp, you're looking, for example, for a boa constrictor, maybe around a reading of 250 watts per meter squared of infrared, of irradiance from a heat lamp, which is mostly infrared. So again, you could do the same thing. You get the meter and go, right, okay, I need a higher wattage, or maybe I need a lower wattage.
Okay.
And that's what that does.
All right. And the other one, I definitely want to get the Lux
yeah,
meter.
$30 you can't say no. For $30 you can't say
no. And I'm for sure getting the solar meter as soon as we get off this call, because I'm too curious now, and I had heard somewhere that those were inaccurate or that they need calibration and things like that, and I think that kind of kept me from getting one. So I'm hearing what you're saying though, that they're spot on even when they're very old. I'm much more inclined to get one now.
Yeah, and and that's not just me saying that. Obviously, the papers are on my website. You can see the study and the data. It's a 3 billion page document on it. There are other meters out there that if you type in UV meter on Amazon, you'll almost certainly see them. They come from a company called RG or RGM. Those are bad. Those are terrible. There's people try and do DIY ones, which I'm all about. People doing DIY projects, that's really fun, but don't buy those ones.
Yeah.
There's the tester cards as well. Don't use them; they're useless. The solar meter is the UVI meter of choice for science and the hobby and the zoos. And in the UK, pet licensing. If you want to have a pet shop, you need to have a UV meter.
Really?
Meter, yeah.
Okay.
Needs to be one.
All right, that's awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Now, what about just keeping animals outdoors? This is something I'm going to be trying out. I'm getting diamond pythons. I'm going to have an enclosure built. I'm excited about that. I'm probably going to use my solar meter on it, and see what kind of UVI they're getting at different areas in the enclosure. Is that the best way to keep a snake if you can?
Good question. Again, everything I say has nuance, but I think the answer to that would be yes. But there is so much nuance to that it becomes impossible to answer correctly. So yes, if possible, if you live in Florida and you're keeping a subtropical/tropical snake, or even a native species, which, can you do that in Florida? Can you keep native species? I don't know if you're allowed to do that.
I don't know. That's a good question. I should know that.
In some places you can keep native species. So yes, absolutely, that is the best way for the animal. Now, if you need to monitor the animal, it may need to be that it needs to be indoors. For example, if you need to monitor it for health reasons. If you want to do training, then it may need to be done indoors. If you're worried about diseases, so if you're keeping a bird and you need to worry about avian influenza, every year in the UK we have avian influenza at least once a year. Nowadays it's twice a year. You need to think about keeping your animal indoors versus outdoors. And other risks, people stealing your animals. People are much more likely to steal your animal outdoors than they are indoors. Again, these are those nuances, right? This is that scale of, you need to think about the specific case that you're in. But ignoring all of that, yes, absolutely, the best way to keep that animal would be outdoors in a nice large mesh cage style thing where it gets all the airflow, providing it's an animal that can survive in Floridian weather. And that you have provision to keep it in if there's a hurricane or anything like that, all those sorts of things. But yes, absolutely, the issue comes from keeping animals in a habitat that they may not be able to adapt to. My prime example that somehow I've become the giraffe lighting expert of the world. My prime example is giraffe. Pretty much every giraffe in the northern hemisphere in the world in captivity has metabolic bone disease.
What?
And I don't really like saying that, but it's pretty much a fact. They all have bone issues. All of them. They're born with metabolic bone disease, pretty much. And when you think about it, it's an animal that comes from sub-Saharan Africa, where they don't go in the shade because they are the shade.
Yeah.
They're in the sun. They're getting UVI 12 constantly for 300 days of the year, for most of the year, and then we're bringing them to Edinburgh or Glasgow or the north of England or even the south of England, where we get sun 3 months a year. We certainly don't get UVI 12 ever.
Yeah.
So they're getting sub adequate light for 3 months of the year, and then the rest of the year they're indoors or outdoors and it's cold and there's no UV. We wonder why they get rickets.
Yeah.
It's a crazy world to me, but that's nothing against the zoos. It's not really a bad thing. It's just it's a fact, and it's something that we've only just learned, is that, oh shit, maybe this is an issue. And something we're doing is lighting giraffe.
Wow.
And I'm working with some zoos to try and get specific lighting. A giraffe is bloody difficult, I'll point out, but
they're pretty big.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen them. They have the really long necks, and they're pretty big. And it's easy to light an animal that's this shape, but an animal that's this shape is really difficult, because the reason for that is because the further away from the light you get, the less intense the UV is. So you either need really high UV at the head and low UV at the body, or low UV across the board, or really high across. It's really difficult to get a nice even spread across the body. In the sun you would, because you could go up 30 meters and not have a change in UVI.
And you can't just throw them on a high dosage of vitamin D3?
You could. There is vitamin D in some of the diets. Now the giraffe, again, like I said, I've become a massive giraffe person, and I recognise this is a reptile podcast, but I'll continue. The other problems with giraffe are that in captivity we tend to feed them with grasses, and in the wild they don't eat grass, they eat trees. They eat browse, not graze.
Yeah. And
graze is high in silica, which is quite hard. Mm-hmm. And we tend to find that giraffes that are fed on a grass-based food have teeth problems because they're wearing away the teeth quicker. Leaves don't have the same amount of silica. Leaves are much softer. Getting them the variety in the diet, and that may also play a part in some of the issues we see in giraffes in captivity. But the analogy of that applies to reptiles as well. I wouldn't personally keep a bearded dragon outdoors in the UK.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't keep a carpet python outdoors in the UK most of the year. You probably could in the summer.
Yeah.
In fact, there's no reason in the UK, there's no reason you couldn't really keep a leopard gecko out in the summer. The issue is our summer isn't very long. And it's not very hot, and it's, there's, like I said, there's always caveats, but in terms of where you are, as long as you're able to provide a natural-like setting and the animal is able to adapt, I don't see a problem keeping them outdoors. If anything is better, there's more enrichment.
Yeah, and I mean, from a lighting perspective,
from a lighting perspective, it's bang on. Yeah, you can't really get better.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm super excited about it, and it took me a little while. Initially, I thought I was going to do it with jungle carpet pythons, and then I was like, yeah, I'll do supplemental heat during the winter, or maybe bring them back inside, or this or that, And I was running through all these scenarios, and then it was like, why not just do the diamond pythons? I mean, their environment is here in Florida, it's so similar to New South Wales.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's no reason why you can't. From a lighting perspective, it is hilariously what we're trying our very best to replicate indoors, but it's free and it's outdoors. So if you can get it outdoors.
Yeah, no environmental impacts. It's just it's there. It's on tap.
The sunrise and the sunset are perfect because they're on time, and would you believe they match the solar spectrum because it's the sun?
Yeah, it's wild.
It's crazy. It's this mad world that we're trying our very best to do in captivity with all of these problems.
What about if you're a snake keeper? What about taking your snake outside and exposing them to some natural sunlight?
That's what I do with my boa. Yeah, it's good. I think even just from an enrichment perspective, it's good for them.
Okay.
It's not the same as providing them full light. So I don't think you can get away with, or you can get away with it, but I don't think it's appropriate to keep them in a box with no light and then just take them out once a day for an hour. I don't think that's appropriate, because you miss the systemic benefits of full spectrum sunlight and the choice of going in and out of sunlight, and the the sunrise and the sunset effect. You miss all of that.
Yeah.
But would it increase welfare to take an animal outdoors, providing it's an animal that isn't going to get stressed, etc., etc.? Would it increase welfare? Yes, it would increase welfare to take that animal outdoors, or to allow that animal some outdoor time, 24 hours, 48 hours, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on your space, your area.
Okay.
Don't do it in Antarctica, but
yeah. But yeah, and I thought about that too, of having an outdoor enclosure that I could cycle animals through.
Really good idea. Really good idea. You're blessed in Florida because you have this. The climate is such that can hold a lot of animals, and a lot of animals can adapt very well. Even the high humidity. Bearded dragons do pretty well in high humidity.
Yeah. Ron St. Pierre keeps bearded dragons outdoors.
Outdoors, full time, yeah.
Yep. All right. Big question that I've been dying to ask you. I kept waiting for it to come up. Is timing. So, I'm starting to experiment with this heat bulb now. Right now, it's on the same timer as my UV bulb, so they both just snap on at the same time, and then they both snap off at the same time. Yeah. I'm giving about, at this time of year, I think like a 10 or 11 hour window, and then when I get into the summer, I do about a 12-hour window. Setting it up, I'm going to put them on 2 separate timers. How long? What should I have come on first? Should it be the heat lamp, which is more of a orangey yellow color, or should it be the UV lamp that comes on first? And then what's the duration that it should run prior to the other kicking on?
Really, really good question. This is something that has been brought up with the dawn of the Arcadia Luminize range.
Yeah.
Where they have a built-in dusk and dawn feature, and you can adjust it. So my answer, as always, is it depends. Ideally, you would have more than those 2 lights, and ideally you would have a way of replicating the sun and a way of replicating sunlight as a whole. Again, this is theoretical in theory, but I'll work from that and work out. Because if you actually look at a sunrise or a sunset, the sky is lit before the sun comes up. Mm-hmm. And things are lit up before the sun comes up. The birds start to sing before the sun actually comes up. The butterflies start to go to bed after the sun goes down. The butterflies are still out. The bats start to come out after the sun has gone down, but it's still light. You can see bats in daylight. Mm-hmm. And that is because of what is called Rayleigh scattering, and that is the light that is on the atmosphere from the sun and is scattering down onto the earth. And that is sunlight, but it's not directly from the sun. It's essentially side lighting. It's like backlighting, and it's that triggers a lot of behavior. So if we're focusing on that perspective, in theory, you would have a low-level light come on, visible light, to replicate the lighting of the sky first, and that would dim up, and then at night dim down, and then you would have you try and then replicate an actual sunrise with lamps to try and replicate the sun itself. So you'd have one set of lights to replicate sunlight as a whole, light as a whole, but then you would have another one or another set of lamps to replicate the sun itself. And the sun itself, when the sun comes up and goes down, goes through different levels of atmospheric attenuation, which basically just means the spectrum changes slightly. So in the very earliest parts of the morning and the very latest parts of the evening, sunlight, direct sunlight, has proportionally more infrared than visible light than UV. And as the day progresses, the proportions change, and that's because there's less stuff blocking the sun. Right? There's less and less atmosphere in the way. So if we're to replicate that with, say, 3 lamps, if we're to say a heat lamp first, then an LED, then a UV lamp, in that order, because that's essentially the way it works. As the infrared comes on first, then the visible light appears, and then the UV appears, and then the opposite in the sunset. And that's what you would do. And I would, in the wild, it's a little bit different, but because of the issues we have with actual lamps in captivity, I would have all of that happen over 20 to 30 minutes. And ignoring the light from the Rayleigh scattering, if we're just focusing on the sun, you would have your heat lamp, and then within 5 or 10 minutes, your LED would start to ramp up. And then within 10 or 20 minutes, your UVB would start to ramp up. And that whole process, they would all be at 100% power by half an hour, and a reverse at sunset. That involves a ramping LED and a ramping UV. Now, you don't want to ramp your heat lamp, because if you ramp it, you're dimming it and you're shifting the spectrum, so you're making it less like the sun. So what you'd rather have is a 25 watt, a 50 watt, 100 watt, and then the 25 would turn on, then the 50, then the 100. That's what you would actually do.
This is madness. This is
not
madness.
doable in the real world. Yeah, not doable in the real world. So for 99% of people, a heat lamp first, then ideally a low output UVB LED, then your UVB, and then if you can, a high output LED to bring brightness into the enclosure, more brightness, like super bright.
Yeah.
And then the opposite in the nighttime. For people who want it even simpler, heat lamp, LED, then UV over half an hour.
Okay.
On, off. That's the simplest way of doing it. Ideally, this is where the benefit of window light comes in. Ideally, the window would provide that backing light for you, so you don't need to worry about that. Then you would...
Problem I have is that the sun rises on the back of my house, and the sun sets on the front of my house. So yes, of course, light comes in, right? But it's super intense for the sunset, and then it's just totally dialed back for the sunrise.
The rest of it, yeah.
And so, I can't believe that these don't exist. Is a smart light bulb that you screw in and it syncs with your Wi-Fi, and then that thing just slowly turns on and changes intensity and what's the word I'm looking for? Spectrum, right? Yeah. So it could just completely mimic sunrise, and like I would love that if they made that light bulb. I can't believe that's not a thing. And at least if it is a thing, because I have lights in my ceiling in here, and I would love to be able to put 4 of those in and just have it turn my whole room on and create an ambient light.
And the theory is there that lamp could exist. Now, to my knowledge, it doesn't. The theory is there that what you would have is you would have a very hot incandescent source. So a heat lamp, but it would be super hot, so 5,000 Kelvin. 6,000 Kelvin, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. And you would have that behind an ozone and H2O filter that would filter out some of the wavelengths that the atmosphere does for us. And the intensity or the density of the ozone and the H2O would change throughout the day. That's all you'd need to do. So you'd have the light come on with the density high, and then the density would shrink, and that would replicate the sun going up. And then the density would go back up again, and that would replicate the sun going down. That's a theoretical lamp. There's no way on earth that exists. If that exists, I'll get my own shoes, right? But there is a way of sort of doing it with many lamps, which is where I'm talking about. You would have like a 5 watt, 10 watt, 15 watt, and then you would have them slowly turn on in order to the point where over your sunrise, the hottest heat lamp would be on. Mm-hmm. And then you could do it with LEDs. Again, the issue with the LED is the spectrum isn't great. The spectrum doesn't replicate sunlight very well. It just is bright for us as humans. It's quite coloured for reptiles. It doesn't produce the UVA. One of the good things about Rayleigh scattering is that UVA is scattered across the sky. And we don't replicate that at all in captivity. We don't replicate that in one bit. Even the best dimming and sunrise sunset systems don't replicate Rayleigh scattering of UVA in the sky. We could do it in theory. Yeah, the Arcadia Lumini stuff is good for that. The issue with the Arcadia Lumini stuff for me is that the timings that they come with out of the box aren't very good. The app is abysmal, and it doesn't quite do what it says. There's a few other technical issues with it, but it doesn't quite do what it says. It's a great product, and I think it can form a part of a really good setup. I just have a few issues with how it is implemented in Enclosure. But you could certainly do it if you were to use a Arcadia Luminize system. You could have the LED slowly dim up, and then at the end of the day, slowly dim back down.
Don't even get me started on the price.
Well, there's that as well.
Yeah.
Although we say that the idea of dimming LEDs and dimming T5s isn't anything really new. We've been doing that in Aquarium for years.
Yeah.
And hilariously, the cost of an aquarium lamp is a hell of a lot more. So we're in the cheap hobby.
Yeah.
If you want a dimming LED system for an aquarium, you're talking thousands of pounds. If you want to go a large aquarium, you're talking tens of thousands of pounds.
Just a plant light. My son wants to get into fish, and I'm pretty excited about getting back into keeping fish. And we were thinking about doing like a 40-gallon, something moderately sized, and just the lights for those are for plants or 250, 350. If you want to keep live plants. So yeah, it's they're crazy. I mean, there's a really good plant light. I don't know if you can get this in the US. In the UK, it's called Pianta, bit of a silly name, from Grogang. Really good. I've been putting those over animals in zoos. Those would work in an aquarium. In Whipsnade Zoo in the UK, we use UVB. So we use T5 systems and LEDs over all the aquaria. So there is no real difference between an LED bar that you could buy for a reptile and the one you could buy for a fish tank. The main difference is the IP rating, the ingress protection rating. As long as you're not getting it wet, generally fine. So for my setup, for the way I'm running things right now with the heat and the UVB, I should have the heat come on, and then about 20-30 minutes later have the UV come on, and then do the reverse when it's time for sunset.
Correct, yeah. And if you were to implement an LED in there as well, just slap the LED in the middle.
Okay.
So at about 15-minute mark, LED. Then at about the half an hour mark, put your UVB lamp on. And then if you were to upgrade to a dimming LED or dimming UVB system, you would just do the same, but make the ramp up, if you like, about 20 or 30 minutes instead.
Okay.
It's not doable. I do it in a lot of my enclosures. And especially with the Wi-Fi plugs now, they're really easy to use. They're really easy to plug on. They change time when your time zone changes, because we have daylight saving time here. So they change time with all that sort of stuff. So they're really in sync with all that sort of stuff, which is another thing the Arcadia Luminize doesn't do, which is really annoying for me.
Daylight savings is the annoying thing. That's the annoying thing.
Yes, that is arguably the worst thing that we've ever done as a species, I think, is daylight savings. So.
Not nuclear weapons. Daylight
No,
savings.
the stupidest thing. What is the point?
I know. Yeah, it's terrible.
Do you do it in Florida? Do you do daylight savings in Florida?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think that I feel like for the last 4, 5, 6 years, there's legislation that comes up that we're going to get rid of it, and then we're promised it's going to go away, and then it stays. I think Arizona, they don't do it in Arizona.
But I think there's a part of Arizona that does, right? There's like a section of Arizona.
It's so stupid. And then yeah, and that the thought process behind it makes no sense at all. None of it makes sense. It's terrible.
It's a very old system, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's from an old world. It's one of those weird things, and it makes things like this really difficult because I actually set up an hour before we started, thinking, oh,
Oh.
it's now, and then I was like, oh crap, it's daylight savings. I forgot. And we changed
Oh.
in the time since. I was like, oh yeah, of course. So I hadn't fully set up. I'd sat down at my computer and thought, huh, oh.
What time is it where you're at?
It
When
is currently 20 to 5 p.m.
Okay.
and
All
it
right.
is pitch black outside.
Is it really?
Yeah, pitch black. There is no light outside.
That's bananas.
Yeah, it goes dark. It goes dark at about 4 o'clock. Or
Oh
half
my
3.
gosh, I'd be so depressed. It's
Yeah,
11
yeah.
it's 11:40 a.m. here.
Yeah, we don't have much light.
Oh.
So what I do is I supplement it with my animal lighting. Luckily, I get enough exposure because I do a lot of testing of lamps, so I get plenty of exposure to UV.
Yeah.
Arguably too much, but yeah, yeah. It's interesting, which is why keeping an animal outside where you are is fine. Keeping an animal outside where I am, we can just about get away with some of the European tortoise species. Keeping them outdoors, so your Hermann's tortoise, your Horsfield tortoise, you can just about keep them outdoors here. But even then, really, my Hermann's are all going down for hibernation now, and they don't come out at all at the moment. There's no point. They don't get any light, and when they do, it's freezing cold.
So do they have a do you bring them inside for that, or do they have a burrow that they go into?
I have my shed is the enclosure basically, and at the back there is a chicken coop door that goes up and down, and it goes up in the morning. Nobody comes out. It goes down. They're good. They put themselves to bed and stuff, and there is lighting in there as well. What I do is I lower the timing of the lighting to match sunlight as close as I can, within reason.
Yeah.
But even then, they're not coming out. They're dug right down, and they don't come out.
Wow.
What I now have to do is find them all because I weigh them before I officially put them under, even though they're almost certainly in hibernation right now. I weigh them all first, so I've got to go and dig in the enclosure and find 4 tortoises, 3 of which are this big. It's a big thing, so it's one of my things I do once a year. So
yeah, that's well, yeah. I've been thinking about doing sort of a building that I can keep all my animals in. That way, I have more space, and if I have more space for cages, I can afford more larger cages. Which I have a custom guy locally that makes custom enclosures, and the price difference between one to the other is usually pretty minimal. It's another $50 to get another foot of space.
Yeah.
And so I hate for the limiting factor to be, well, that wall only has 6 foot, so therefore I'm only going to do 6 foot. But I was thinking with that building not doing windows, but now I'm thinking it might be beneficial to have some windows, and maybe what I'll do is I'll put them higher up on the wall so they'd be above the enclosures to allow more natural light in. And
the natural day skylight, if you like.
Yeah.
It's I have my house, and I have a little office space that I use for some of my testing and admin stuff, and then I have my lab, which is in the garage, which is where I do a lot of my spectrometry stuff. But in terms of keeping animals, I have. They've slowly. We moved house specifically so that I could keep more animals, and they're now spilling out. I've got 2 cages, not cages or enclosures, with emerald tree skinks in here in the office as well. So I've got they're spilling out into the rest of the house, unfortunately. But
yeah,
my office.
This is my office, and it filled up pretty quickly, and now the formal dining area, which we never used, is going to become an extension.
Yes, that's always what happens. Always the case. It's the same thing. My kitchen has a tortoise enclosure in it. So
wow!
Like a kitchen diner area. I have a reptile room. I have these 2 in here. We have the shed. I have some in the garage with me. Some Testudo Kleinmani Egyptian tortoises. They're in the garage in my lab. I have a lot of. They're behind like a curtain so that I can make it dark when I'm testing lights. So if I need to test a light, I'll kind of put them behind a curtain. Yeah, it's and then I have enclosures at the office that I used for testing, and then they just kind of sat there. And every time I go, I'm like, I could put something in those. So,
all right, well, Tommy boy, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on, and I hope that this gets this sheds some light, if I can use the pun, on this subject with maybe people that aren't keeping or focusing on lighting, and I hope that it was a conversation that brings some knowledge to people that, you know, maybe aren't thinking about it. And I hope it's in a digestible format. You did a fantastic job answering a lot of or all of my questions, rather.
Thank you. Yeah, I do worry that I'm blurting out things like UVA, UVB, UV1, and people go, "What the fucking hell is this guy talking about?" And you know, it's difficult. It's definitely difficult to do without a visual aid with me. I usually have some sort of slideshow to show people, but yeah, there's lots and lots of resources that people can use for gaining more knowledge about this. And I think my send away message is, don't ask, does my animal need it? Ask, would the welfare increase? And the answer is always yes.
Yeah. And it's such a nuanced subject. And I wore this shirt on, you know, on purpose. It says "United We Stand," and that is that goes for reptile keepers, you know, around the world. And if you know, if we're constantly focused on infighting, and your way is wrong and my way is right, and if we can maybe take more of a nuanced perspective, I think it would be really beneficial for everybody in the entire hobby, for us to all, you know, stand together and keep our animals as best we can too, and in the most humane way.
Yeah, it makes it. Why wouldn't we want to? Yeah, it makes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Damn, Thomas. I can't.
Fucking camera. Fucking being shit. It does keep doing something, actually. The camera keeps